a selfless and caring single mother.
She just loved life.
Dana would help in any way she could.
Is ruthlessly killed in her own home.
There was a great deal of damage to her throat.
It was a rather brutal attack.
And it would have taken somebody very, very strong to have done that kind of damage.
Leaving a family devastated.
I cried every night.
You just can't fathom it. You can't comprehend it.
Police uncover a deadly obsession.
She was being stalked by this guy.
He had become violent.
He was a heavy drug user.
To expose a killer closer than expected.
How is that possible? Someone that Dana was trying to help. That had to be a huge betrayal.
Every time they looked at an obvious suspect, that person had an alibi.
What I was told completely changed everything.
That was quite a shock.
I couldn't believe it.
It was all a bunch of lies.
Puyallup, Washington, a charming and peaceful town at the foot of Mount Rainier.
The city of Puyallup is about 30 miles south of Seattle, 6 miles east of Tacoma.
It's just a nice little town. It's a community, a lot of families, parks.
Has a small town feel to it. There's a lot of small businesses. The downtown area is easily walkable. It's a terrific little community.
The tranquility is shattered in August 2001 when police get a call from a worried couple who cannot reach their nanny, Dana Laskowski, even after several attempts to contact her.
We got a call from Dana's employers that she hadn't shown up for work. Her employers assured us it was very unusual for Dana to not show up.
An officer is sent to Dana's home to investigate and arrives at 11 a.m., 3 full hours after she was expected to arrive for work.
The officer arrived. He knocked on the front, knocked on the back door, and found the back door ajar. He walked in the back door, walked through the kitchen and through the house, and found an adult female who's deceased on the couch in the living room.
Working off a general description, the officer identifies the victim as Dana Laskowski. The crime scene is secured until detectives from Puyallup PD arrive.
When we found her on the couch, we see the position of her body, and that's unusual. Her one arm is underneath her head, her other arm is behind her back. She's twisted so that her waist is at an awkward angle. The awkward twist to her body is something that we don't normally see in a natural death scene. It just has a sense that it's a murder. We saw abrasions to the neck, and there was a small pool of blood at her mouth. We did see abrasions on her elbows and knees.
The investigator's suspicions are confirmed. Dana was murdered.
What it looked like was a strangulation that occurred on the couch, and then the offender simply left her in the position that we found her.
Forensic technicians searched the living room for evidence.
Primarily, the items that we collected were either hair or fibers, and then extensively processed for fingerprints. When we were processing the carpet, we discovered blood trail or spatter of some sort.
The locations of those were believed to be consistent with the struggle.
Investigators continue their work throughout the rest of the home.
It looked to me like the house had been ransacked. It had a feel that it had been searched, where someone was looking for something. We discovered a basement window that had appeared to have been recently broken, and it was possibly a point of entry.
One of the first things we're going to wonder is, was the victim murdered by a burglar that broke into her house during the night? Or was the murderer somebody that she had invited over the house?
As they wrap up their work at the scene, detectives contact Dana's family to deliver the tragic news.
My son phoned me, and I said, yeah, and he says, He said, Dana's dead. That was it. I was pretty much in shock, and I said, tell me one more time, say what you said, because I didn't want to believe it. You can't imagine that, because, you know, there was no reason.
Born in 1965, Dana's childhood was filled with joy.
She was the happiest kid in the world. So she just was so easy. She just loved life.
Dana was also creative, a special bond she shared with her father, Bill, an award-winning artist.
She was always making things. She was artistic, like me, and was interested in what I did and wanted to help. So we were close.
Just being around her, you felt her energy. You felt her enthusiasm and her zest for living each moment.
As she grew older, Dana developed a nurturing spirit.
She was babysitting from the time she was very young, and she loved the kids, and she always wanted to have a daycare.
In 1989, Dana met Sam and fell in love. The couple married quickly, but from the start, there were complications.
She was having trouble getting pregnant.
In 1993, after years of fertility treatments, Dana's wish of starting a family finally came true.
She was so excited when she found out she was pregnant, because that's what she really wanted all her life, and it was a pretty exciting time.
Dana's delight only grew when she discovered they were having triplets.
She loved the kids, because then she could bake and she could make things and do art. She loved it, she really did.
But by 2000, after 11 years of marriage, the stress of parenting took its toll on their relationship.
Dana told me that she had moved and that they were separated.
As a single mom, Dana worked hard to provide a good home for her triplets. Dana cared deeply about family, and especially for her troubled 17-year-old niece, Amanda, with whom she was very close.
Dana would do anything for Amanda.
Amanda loved Dana, because, you know, Dana was kind of this flashy, artistic type person, and Amanda loved all that too.
Dana was a very kind, caring person, loved her family. Amanda was a frequent runaway, so Dana wanted to guide Amanda out of risky behavior, away from drugs, away from the runaway lifestyle.
Amanda had a rough relationship with her parents, so would often turn to her favorite aunt.
By all accounts, she was the kind of the cool aunt that you could go and actually tell the truth to about your problems. No judgment, just help.
Dana soon became a surrogate mom to Amanda and her best friend, Emily Lauenborg.
Food, showers, a warm place to stay, money. Dana would open her heart and her home to help in any way she could.
She was a mentor and also a friend.
Dana had an open door policy and would always welcome Amanda's friends to her home.
She was very comfortable at her age being amongst teenagers as though they were her peers.
Just everybody loved her.
But now, all that is left is loss and unanswered questions.
For us to lose Dana was so hard.
Losing a child is probably the worst thing that can ever happen. And, you know, she shouldn't have died before me.
Who would want this loving and generous spirit dead? And why?
This murder was very unusual. Right from the start, we had a lot of things that needed to be done in order to find the killer.
Back at the station, detectives start reaching out to those closest to Dana. They begin with her ex-husband, Sam, who they learn has the triplets staying with him.
As the ex-husband, Sam, is a person of interest and the first person we needed to look at. But we couldn't find him. The fact that he was missing, this is significant to us. We have to find him.
Coming up, investigators uncover a dark obsession.
He had kind of gotten fixated on her, and he didn't really take no for an answer.
And alarming secrets
in the journal that said 10 things I want to do before I die, and one of those 10 things was kill somebody and get away with it.
That point to a killer no one would ever suspect.
I felt what he was telling me was not possible.
You just can't comprehend that it's real.
And the truth is finally revealed.
That's about as close to a confession as you're going to get.
Police investigating the murder of mother of three, Dana Laskowski, are trying to track down her estranged husband, Sam, when suddenly they receive a surprise call.
Sam actually reached out to the police to try to find out what had happened. Sam, it turned out, he had taken his kids camping and away from his phone and away from contact. And so when he got back to civilization, he had all these messages that Dana was murdered.
So we went up to interview Sam, Dana's ex. And so when we confirmed that Dana was murdered, Sam was upset. He would respond to all of our questions, but he's just not the kind of person that elaborates. As we were talking to Sam, we noticed he did have some abrasions on his knees, and that's unusual. We asked him about that, and he said they were from playing baseball. It was baseball season.
Detectives press Sam about his feelings toward Dana.
When asked about his relationship with Dana, Sam described it as they were estranged, but they co-parented their kids, and they've had arguments, but overall, they were trying to make it work.
Sam and Dana just grew apart.
When she moved away, she was so excited. I think it made her feel good about knowing that she could be independent, and I think that was important for her to be able to do that on her own.
We just felt that Sam was mad at Dana for having relocated 3 hours away and had split the family, and the hopes of having a family and a marriage were dashed and destroyed.
Was that enough to push Sam over the edge and harm Dana?
Based on the information that we had about her ending her time with her husband and becoming estranged, we thought Sam had possibly come over to discuss something that has to do with custody, and they'd gotten into a fight, and the fight resulted in Dana's death.
Police ask Sam where he was the night of Dana's murder.
Sam said that he had left his kids at his home and he went and got gas. He showed us a receipt for that gas. He said the next day he went camping with the triplets.
Detectives believe Dana was killed sometime between midnight and 7 a.m., but Sam cannot corroborate where he was at that particular time.
There wasn't an ironclad alibi. He didn't have 3 adults who would be able to say he was with us all night. They were kids, they were sleeping. It was not impossible for Sam to have left the kids and come back to Dana's house and committed the murder.
And we looked at the possibility that he filled up his gas tank, drove to Puyallup, killed Dana, and then drove back to the kids at the home.
Investigators press Sam further.
Sam denied killing Dana. When we approached Sam for his fingerprints and his DNA, he was not necessarily agreeable or cooperative, didn't like the idea that he was a potential suspect. He certainly didn't like the idea that we thought that he might be responsible for her murder.
Sam didn't really want to cooperate with requests for DNA and hair samples.
Sam's behavior may be suspicious, but police have no concrete evidence to tie him to the murder.
You can't charge someone with a crime just because their alibi isn't ironclad. You can't charge them with a crime because they can't prove they were someplace else. You have to prove that they committed that crime. There has to be evidence at the scene that connects the person to the crime. And so in this particular case, they didn't have that with Sam.
While police seek hard evidence against Sam, Dana's autopsy results come in.
The results were that she had died of strangulation.
The cause of death was a fracture of the cricoid cartilage in her throat.
There was a great deal of damage to her throat, her windpipe, and it would have taken somebody very, very strong to have done that kind of damage.
We were going to be looking for an offender who had upper body strength and prone to flying into a rage. Because of the fracture, the cricoid cartilage takes a great deal of strength. And a strangulation itself takes a very committed attack. The victim generally fights back. And then the attacker has to double down on the strangulation while the victim is struggling back.
Just to think that Dana struggled and fought for her life, it's just wrong. It's all wrong.
Looking for new leads, detectives turn to Dana's niece.
Police contacted Amanda as she was a relative and somebody who knew the victim. And what Amanda said was that Dana was the kind of person where she could go over, do the laundry, maybe get a little bit of money. That was who she was, and that's how she helped out Amanda. And she didn't know what had happened or who would want to murder her aunt.
Detectives also speak to the couple who employed Dana as a nanny. When asked if they knew of anyone who might want to harm Dana, their answer is chilling.
Dana's employers told us that Dana was being stalked by this guy. Her employers told us that Dana had said that if anything happened to her, he'd be the one. And that was significant to us because I'm looking for a killer.
Police investigating the strangling of Dana Laskowski have been told that she was being harassed by a stalker. Could he be her killer?
Dana's employers told us that Dana was afraid of this Patrick. Patrick was a guy that installed cable in Dana's area. He liked her.
Dana had told her sister-in-law and her employer he had kind of gotten fixated on her. Dana, by accounts, let him know that she wasn't interested.
Police learned that Patrick had been trying to contact Dana for over a month straight, and that his pursuit had become even more intense.
Patrick was leaving notes and flowers on her back porch. He wrote some notes that were like poems.
Then, the messages took a disturbing turn.
Dana's friends told the investigators he left her a note letting her know that he had been observing her and seen her doing things inside her home that he wouldn't know unless he was observing her.
Dana mentioned that she was concerned about someone possibly watching her.
The thing that really concerned Dana was that it appeared that he had her under surveillance. Dana had actually told a couple of people that if I ever turn up dead, Patrick did it.
Investigators checked Dana's phone records, searching for any clues.
The phone records indicated that Patrick had phoned Dana repeatedly.
It wasn't just some guy who, sent her a couple extra texts and then disappeared. This was somebody who was going beyond that, doing stalking type things that would be concerning in any context.
When investigators look into Patrick further, they make an alarming discovery.
Patrick was driving a white van. It was a ladder truck. We had neighbors that had identified a white van in the area around Dana's residence prior to the murder.
His work van had been seen in the alley behind the house. It was a white van, so it matched the description that the neighbors had mentioned.
Pretty much demanded that we look at him as a very real suspect in killing Dana.
Did Patrick's obsession with Dana turn deadly?
We immediately got a search warrant for his DNA, for his locker, for his vehicle.
On September 2nd, detectives find Patrick at his home address.
We served the search warrant on him. He was very belligerent and very uncooperative with us during the service of that search warrant.
He didn't want to answer questions. He didn't want to let them in the house. He did the kind of things that you might expect somebody to do if they had in fact been stalking someone and had gotten caught doing that.
Investigators bring Patrick down to the station where they tell him Dana has been murdered.
His demeanor changed 180 degrees from being belligerent and confrontational to Dana is dead. He says, I'm sorry, I didn't know that. I didn't kill her. Here, please take my DNA, search everything. I'm not the one who killed her.
Detectives asked Patrick where he was the night Dana was murdered.
Patrick said that he was at work that evening. He then hung out with some friends and went to bed.
Once given the information for his alibi, investigators looked into it, and they were actually able to verify it. He had an alibi and could not have committed the murder.
We also ruled out Patrick's ladder truck with the van the neighbors told us that they saw drive around Dana's residence. There was nothing in the service of the search warrant or in our investigation that indicated that Patrick wasn't being truthful with us.
Given what he had done and the ways in which he had scared Dana prior to that, he's very lucky that his alibi could be confirmed.
Having cleared Patrick, investigators now focus on another man in Dana's life, Michael, who they learn was having a long-distance relationship with her.
Michael lived up in Canada, worked in the film industry. Dana met him when she was up in Canada visiting one of her friends.
And they hit it off, and so they started to date. But he stayed in Vancouver, and she was down in Puyallup, and that's a several-hour drive from Puyallup to Canada.
Friends tell police that their relationship was not without problems.
They said Michael would party to the level of like a teenager, that he was at a certain level of partying that Dana didn't approve of. And so Dana was a little uncomfortable with that.
There'd been a point where Dana had broken it off, but he was still interested, so they tried to make it work and get back together.
But when detectives dig deeper, they learn Michael has a darker side.
We were told that Michael was a biker, that he was a heavy drug user.
Police also uncover a significant piece of information.
Dana confessed to a friend that she'd had a one-night stand. And when Dana had that one-night stand, she was still in a relationship with Michael.
Could this have been a motive for Michael to kill Dana?
When we found out that Dana had a one-night stand, we looked at Michael as a potential suspect, possibly murdering Dana out of revenge.
Investigators searching for the killer of single mother Dana Leskowski have a new possible suspect, her boyfriend Michael. Detectives want to know if an infidelity may have led to Dana's death.
That caused us to believe that we had to rule him out as a person of interest. Michael lived in Canada, so we went up, and when we talked to Michael about Dana's death, it appeared to us that he was very emotionally overcome by it, that Dana was the love of his life, and that she had been taken out of his life, and that he was very seriously grieved.
Michael also tells police he knew about the one-night stand, but had moved on. Detectives press him further.
Michael told us that when he was on the phone with Dana on the night of her death, that she seemed a little guarded to him. He told her that he loved her, and then she didn't tell him back that she loved him, and he thought that was a little odd.
He didn't like how the conversation ended.
And that prompted him to want to get on the road and come down to see her and see if everything was okay.
Michael claims he never made it to see Dana.
He said he was stopped at the border and he was turned away. He had some legal matter up in Canada that wasn't settled, and so he wasn't admitted. There was border crossing records that verified his alibi, that he did not cross the border.
He got stopped by Border Patrol, and so he was able to show definitively that he was not anywhere near Puyallup at the time of Dana's murder.
We didn't find the evidence to support that Michael had committed the murder.
Michael is ruled out as a suspect. Police also determined the man Dana had a one-night stand with was nowhere near her house on the night of the murder.
At this point of the investigation, we just were really kind of at a dead end.
I mean, there were all these people who would have been really good, solid suspects in any homicide investigation, but all of them had alibis, and all the alibis were verified.
I was frustrated that the case wasn't moving forward, that it wasn't advancing.
With the case at a standstill, detectives search for any detail they may have overlooked.
Where Dana's ashes are inurned, there's a book, and people can go and write their memoirs.
The book has been left open for comment since Dana's funeral.
If the perpetrator was someone who went to the funeral, and if the perpetrator was someone who maybe has some guilt about that, they may have left a clue behind.
When detectives look at the book, one entry, written over a month after the funeral, grabs their attention.
One of the memoirs that was written by Dana's niece, Amanda. And she said, "I'm so sorry I wasn't a better niece for you. 34 days clean and sober. It's all for you."
That was significant. There was something about the way that she'd written it that suggested it was a communication to Dana of remorse and to make amends for what had happened. And it was something that was significant enough to follow up on.
Why did Amanda write that she had let Dana down? Detectives have a hunch that she may know more about her aunt's death than she's been letting on.
That's it. That's the key. The key is the niece. I called Amanda in for an interview. When I asked her, "What do you know?" she said, "I wasn't there. I don't know what happened."
With Dana gone, Amanda has been missing a mother figure, getting into trouble, and as detectives learn, spending time with a rough crowd.
In the center of Puyallup downtown, we had Pioneer Park, and a lot of troubled teens would hang out there. The park kids called themselves the Park Rats. Amanda usually would be out around town in the middle of the night, hanging out with the Park Rats.
Dana would often welcome Amanda's circle of friends into her own home. Could one of the Park Rats that Amanda knows have been somehow involved in Dana's death?
And I talked to her about who of her friends would meet this profile of having upper body strength, prone to flying into a rage. And Amanda said, "Well, it sounds like you're describing Blaine." She said Blaine actually attacked her on a couch, and it was a rather brutal attack.
Blaine had come on to her, and that she had rejected him, and that he had become violent.
Had Blaine tried the same thing on Dana, only for things to turn deadly?
Blaine had been at Dana's house before in some casual get-togethers, and possibly Dana would have rebuffed that advance, and that Blaine would be the kind to fly into a rage.
Then Amanda reveals something else.
Amanda said that while we were processing her Auntie Dana's crime scene, she was across the street. She ran into Blaine there. She said that Blaine had scratches on his arms. When I get this information from Amanda, I look into Blaine and I find that he's got a violent past and he has quite a criminal history.
Police learn that Blaine's rap sheet is extensive and littered with drug and gun charges.
I felt he was a very good person of interest in the murder of Dana Laskowski.
But there's a big problem. Blaine is no longer in Washington.
I found him living in the far southeast part of the United States. I wanted to bring him back to Washington to collect his DNA, to talk to him as a person of interest. But he was not cooperating.
As investigators attempt to extradite Blaine, they seek out known criminals he's associated with and find one of them, a friend of Blaine's, serving time in jail.
I sat down with him and I said, "I'm looking at Blaine as being responsible for the murder of Amanda's aunt. He's got this upper body strength, he's prone to violence." And he looked at me and he said, "Blaine didn't kill Amanda's aunt." What I was told completely changed everything.
Detectives hunting the killer of Dana Laskowski have a new suspect, Blaine, the troubled friend of Dana's beloved niece, Amanda. With Blaine out of state, investigators grill his friend in jail, and what he tells them is explosive.
So police suggested to him that maybe Blaine had been involved. The friend said, no, it's not Blaine, it's Emily.
He said Emily killed Amanda's aunt.
It's a stunning allegation. 17-year-old Emily Lauenborg is Amanda's best friend and someone who Dana treated like a daughter.
I felt what he was telling me was not possible because Dana always had an open door and was always welcoming to Emily.
Police found out that a lot of times Amanda and Emily would show up at Dana's house.
Dana was somebody that Emily could go to safely regardless of the circumstances, and Dana would take her in.
So as you can imagine, that was quite a shock to the team.
To confirm his story, investigators speak to other members of the Park Rats.
Two of these kids told me, yes, Emily killed Amanda's aunt. Blaine didn't kill Amanda's aunt.
Nobody doubts that Emily did it. Nobody.
One of these individuals told us that Emily was doing a lot of drugs.
Had Emily's reckless behavior somehow played a role in Dana's death?
I was told that they all had nicknames for each other, and that Emily's nickname was Mutant.
The first nickname that we called her was the Mutant, because she was stronger than any other girls that we knew. Everybody's scared. She'll beat your ass. She'll knock you out.
She was tough. She would challenge them to wrestling. She would beat them in wrestling. She was very intense.
And I was told she's able to choke people. She would wrap one arm around their neck, grab the other hand, and flip their body over her hip. And that was consistent with the body position that we found Dana Laskowski in. Twisted at the waist, with one arm behind her back and an injury to the neck.
And so the initial thought that it can't be her was slowly replaced with, well, maybe it could be her. She's intense, she's strong, and everybody seems to be kind of scared of her.
Did Emily actually kill Dana? And if she did, what could be her motive for committing such a heinous crime? Investigators bring Emily in for an interview.
I sat down with her, and I had a tape recorder, and she said, "Aren't you going to turn that thing on?" I would say she was quite self-confident, a little cocky.
She was not particularly cooperative with efforts to talk to her about what happened.
I said, here you are, sitting in a police station under suspicion of murder, and you're playing this game with a detective. And I said, look at these people right here that have told us you killed her. And she said, those people are lying, and that she didn't do it. She got very angry. Those people are lying.
When investigators ask Emily where she was the night of the murder, she dodges the question.
She was bartering and arguing with me and not really giving me a clear defense and denial.
Officers obtain a warrant to search Emily's residence.
One of the items that they recovered from Emily's apartment was a shirt that Emily had taken from Dana.
One of her friends told us that Emily had a black shirt that belonged to Dana and that she actually wore that to Dana's funeral. We went back to the pictures of the funeral and did see that Emily was wearing a black shirt.
One possible explanation for that was rubbing her nose in it. Not only did I kill you, but I'm wearing your blouse to your funeral.
The search uncovers more incriminating evidence.
And we found this journal. And in the journal, it said, 10 things I want to do before I die. And one of those 10 things was kill somebody and get away with it.
One of the statements in the journal that Emily wrote in her own hand when talking about Amanda, because she'd gotten into an argument with Amanda, was, I could effing strangle that bitch just like her aunt.
So that was very significant. I was invigorated because I had something.
That's about as close to a confession as you're going to get. It is absolutely sufficient for me to take that to a jury and say, this is her admitting that she killed Dana Laskowski.
On March 13th, 2003, Emily is charged with first-degree murder.
When I found out that Emily did what she did, I couldn't believe it.
When you find out that such a young person could take a life, how is that possible? Someone that Dana was trying to help and care for, that had to be a huge betrayal. You just can't fathom it. You can't comprehend it. It's devastating.
Though Emily is in custody, prosecutors know most of the evidence against her is circumstantial. So they circle back to Amanda.
It became pretty clear that Amanda was going to be the key to solving this. We needed Amanda to crack, because absent that, or a confession, there wouldn't have been enough to prove that Emily committed that crime.
If Amanda did know what happened, why hadn't she told police? And why had she covered for her best friend?
So I meet with Amanda and I said, listen, Amanda, you have led us on a wild goose chase. Starting off with Blaine, who was in another state. He didn't do this. You have not come forward with this right from the start. You know what? This is a case of conspiracy after the fact. So tell me what happened. That's when she really cried and sobbed.
Police have charged local teen Emily Lauenborg with the murder of Dana Laskowski. Now, investigators suspect Emily's best friend, Amanda, Dana's own niece, may also be involved.
I said, all right, tell me what happened. You've sent us on every possible goose chase and every rabbit trail you could head us down. It was all a bunch of lies.
Through tears, Amanda makes a horrific revelation.
Amanda disclosed that she and Emily came to Dana's house and they came to the back door. They were high on some drugs and they just went up to try to get some money. And Emily was rude and Dana said, you girls have to go.
Things quickly escalate.
Emily was being belligerent and Dana touched Emily to kind of guide her out the door, and Emily just exploded into a rage or attack.
Basically, she attacked her, put her in that wrestling hold, and squeezed too tight with some kind of scarf or fabric.
Amanda said she turned around because she didn't want to watch what was happening.
But she heard a crack, and she heard a gurgle. She heard Dana gasping for her life, and then she didn't hear anything. And that was because Dana was dead.
And then they took the money and left.
It seemed to be, by Amanda's account, that it was kind of an explosive situation that got out of control. They didn't go to the house to murder Dana.
I was told that Emily had said that Amanda was always ditching her for her aunt.
Emily, she was jealous of Dana.
It's my opinion that the motive Emily had was to get Dana's influence out of Amanda's life, and Emily just went over there with the intention of getting Dana so mad at Amanda that Amanda wouldn't be welcome at Dana's anymore, and that Emily would have achieved what she wanted, and that the murder simply got out of control because of emotions and drugs.
But why didn't Amanda come forward earlier to tell the truth about what happened that night?
I asked her, why didn't you tell us right up front, right at the start? She said, because of my family. It's so bad now. What's it going to be like now when they find out?
She wasn't involved in the murder, but she was involved because she was there at that time, and I don't know why she didn't do anything. It was upsetting and surprising to all of us.
Prosecutors need Amanda's testimony to have any hope of convicting Emily for murder. Amanda agrees and will not face any charges herself.
If she's charged with a crime, then she has the right to remain silent.
She was the star witness for the case. If we had charged her criminally, we couldn't have called her as a witness.
Despite the agreement, prosecutors fear Amanda won't keep her side of the deal.
The biggest challenge for us, from a prosecution standpoint, was that setting aside Amanda's testimony, everything else was circumstantial. Wearing a blouse can be explained away. An angry journal entry can also be explained away. I think the only way that we could have been successful in front of a jury was to have Amanda take the stand. The problem was knowing exactly where Amanda's loyalties would be. She was very conflicted, and there was definitely a chance that Amanda could have taken the stand and said, I lied to the police when I said what I saw, and I didn't see any of that.
I was very concerned that the jury was going to listen to this case and look at Emily and say, I just don't buy it.
This is a case where, had we taken it to a jury, all of those questions that had come up in the investigation, all the initial leads, all the doubts that it could really have been Emily, all the alternate explanations were certainly enough that it could have been that a jury had decided that we just didn't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt.
Prosecutors face a difficult choice. Risk Emily walking free after a jury trial, or guarantee at least some jail time with a plea deal.
Ultimately, what we're trying to do here is to make sure that we hold the killer responsible. Emily was allowed to plead guilty to a lesser charge of manslaughter.
On January 21st, 2004, over 2 years after Dana's murder, Emily is formally sentenced.
Emily was charged as an adult. Her sentence was just under 7 years.
Even though Emily is sent to prison, her sentence brings a mix of emotions.
I felt a sense of relief that someone was now being held accountable for Dana's death, but I did feel angry.
I thought, well, at least it's something, you know. But it just was amazing that you could take the life of a young mother and only get like 6 years. Doesn't make sense.
Dana's family was upset that the sentence was so light. They felt that the person responsible for taking the life of Dana should have been given a stiffer sentence.
It was really tragic. And one of the things about the criminal justice system is it doesn't put things back the way they were. It just tries to hold people responsible so people can move forward.
I cried every night. I think I must have cried for a year. I miss her a tremendous amount, and I will think about her forever.
I don't think we ever will get over the loss of something so tragic.
I can't really say her family ever had closure, because to them, the loss was the loss of Dana. A gavel dropping doesn't undo that loss.
I miss her a lot.
I think Dana would want to be remembered as a loving mother, a loving friend, and a loving child.
A sweet and beloved senior
Margaret liked being out. She liked being around people.
She was very friendly, very outgoing.
is viciously murdered in her own home.
Oh my Lord, it's her. And I pretty much lost it.
I actually thought I was going to get sick.
To be snuffed out in such a way is just horrific.
Police uncover a trail of suspects.
How would he know the information unless he was in the crime scene?
Having people know how she was found and even what she was wearing is very suspicious.
It just wasn't adding up he was not being honest and something else was going on.
Before a disturbing discovery.
He was just photographing her in her own home.
Points to a deranged killer nobody saw coming.
I don't think anyone in law enforcement could have had any inkling of the outcome of this case.
This is sick. This is not a normal murder.
This wasn't a horror movie. This was actually happening.
Wadsworth, Ohio, a haven for families just outside Akron.
Wadsworth, a very quiet town. It's very community-oriented.
It's a great family community. It's very common for people not even to lock their doors because there's never a lot of crime that occurs right around in there.
On a Monday morning, April 9th, 2018, the peace is interrupted when police receive a call from a worried citizen.
Water Police.
Yes, this is Howard Leisure. My aunt lives on Portage Street. A friend of ours stopped over there yesterday to check on her, and she was nowhere to be found.
Okay.
He says papers were on the porch for the last 3 days.
What's her name?
Margaret Douglas.
Initially, the police department was contacted about Margaret being missing from her home.
We don't know where she's at. She's 98 years old.
Did she live there by herself?
She lives there by herself, yes. And she never locks her house.
So our initial response was to look for Margaret to see if she had fallen inside her home and needed help. Patrol officers walked through it, yelling for her to see if she would answer.
We continued to canvass the neighborhood, and we did not locate her.
If her close friends, she's not with them, something's wrong.
We contacted area hospitals and looked in any possible place that she could be.
Margaret was just basically missing.
That evening, Howard and his wife, Cindy, head to Margaret's home to help police with the search.
They asked if we could come down and meet them at the house.
Howard and Cindy started to look for some items common for Margaret to have taken with her when she left. There were specific shoes that she would wear. They were looking for a little red wallet that she carried her money and her credit cards in when she left the home.
So Howard went to look in that front closet.
The clothes had dropped or slipped down that was piled in the top of the closet.
He said, "Oh, I found her shoe." He tried to pull the shoe out.
And I touched it, and it felt cold and clammy.
The shoe was still attached to Margaret, who was in the closet.
And I thought, oh my Lord, it's her. And I pretty much lost it. Something I'll never forget, I'm sorry. But to find her like that.
It was a terrible shock, especially for her nephew Howard, and I just remember the look on his face.
I actually thought I was going to get sick. I think we were just so appalled and shocked that someone would kill her.
What motive could there be to kill a 98-year-old woman? What could she have done to anybody that would have resulted in that?
Margaret's home is declared a crime scene, and homicide detectives arrive.
Margaret was positioned with her head down in the corner and her backside kind of up in the air. Her underpants were torn inside the closet there. Her nightgown was all unsnapped, and her bra was pulled up. I immediately thought that there was a sexual element to the crime. There was a lot of trauma to Margaret's neck region. Somebody was able to strangle her, and my assumption was manually due to the lack of any ligature marks.
Looking at the condition of Margaret's body, rigor came and gone. You could look at the different lividity and the pulling of the blood inside the body to see it appeared she had been there for a few days.
As the forensics team gathers DNA and fingerprints, detectives search the house for further evidence.
Her wallet was not located, so that gave us an indication that maybe this was a burglary and they had made off with just the wallet. Margaret didn't always lock her doors, so we weren't surprised when we didn't find forced entry into her home.
Investigators find their first clue outside the home.
I observed a plastic food service glove on the back side of the house and collected the glove just in case that it was involved.
There was not a lot of physical evidence at the crime scene. Besides the glove, the missing wallet was something, but nothing that would direct us in a certain way.
Who would attack and kill a 98-year-old woman in her own home? As they set out for answers, detectives turned to Howard and Cindy to learn more about Margaret.
The best thing to do is to get to know your victim as best you can.
Born in Akron, Ohio in 1919, Margaret was known as a woman of strong character with a fiercely independent streak.
She knew what she wanted, and she wasn't afraid to go after what she wanted to get.
Margaret often told us about her days working at the O'Neills in downtown Akron. She liked being out, she liked being around people.
She was very friendly, very outgoing.
Margaret had very strong opinions, and she was certainly not afraid to tell you what her opinion was.
She was a pretty independent woman, let's put it that way.
After World War II, Margaret married the love of her life, Army veteran Donald Douglas.
If I saw Margaret, I saw Donald, her husband. They were made for each other. They just complemented each other.
The couple moved into the house that Margaret would live in for the rest of her life.
I think Margaret might have lived in that neighborhood close to 70 years.
It was Margaret and Donald's choice not to have any children, and they seemed extremely happy together.
They liked to travel together. They went to ball games. They enjoyed going to the Indians game.
When Donald passed away in the year 2000, Margaret chose to remain in her house, surrounded by friends and caring neighbors.
Margaret was a pretty good friend with the neighbors, David and his wife.
There was another neighbor across the street. Her name was Jan. They just sort of kept an eye on Margaret.
She knew all the kids in the neighborhood, but as she got older, she's got more restricted to the house, and that's when me and my wife stepped in at that point and started taking her shopping and doing things for her as needed.
Margaret loved the fact that she was 98 years old, and she wanted to be 100. She truly loved life.
For someone to have lived such a wonderful, vibrant life, only to be snuffed out in such a way is just horrific. I have a grandmother that's similar in age. It's just very hit close to home.
The investigators were under a tremendous amount of pressure. Every one of them took it very personally, and I think every one of them wanted to find justice very quickly for the family.
At the onset, we had no clue. There was no direction.
Maybe it's financial. Maybe it was a relationship issue. Maybe it was an argument that went too far and something happened that they didn't expect. But at that stage in the investigation, you just don't know.
We need to start somewhere, so we start closest to her.
So that would include looking at Howard and Cindy.
We definitely leave everyone on the list until we can exclusively rule them out and have that be a certainty and not just a feeling.
Coming up, is Margaret's killer hiding in plain sight?
He knew details of where Margaret was found and in what state she was found.
He's coming back to the scene of a crime.
Detectives unearth dark secrets.
We found a journal about a desire to kill people.
He was videotaping her while she slept, stalking his victim like an animal stalks its prey.
Leading to a killer no one saw coming.
This is somebody that's ultimately going to be a serial killer if he's not caught.
Police are investigating the murder of 98-year-old Margaret Douglas, whose body was discovered stuffed in a closet in her own home.
I just can't imagine a 98-year-old woman being that terrified and not knowing what to do. It's definitely one of the most traumatic things I've ever had to experience in my years with the Wadsworth Police Department.
Detectives begin by interviewing those closest to Margaret. her nephew Howard, and his wife Cindy.
We fingerprint and get DNA from Cindy and Howard to show whether their fingerprints or DNA were on something that it should not have been on. We did subpoenas for phone records and also location data, GPS data, so we could tell their whereabouts during the time in question. Cindy and Howard lived approximately 30 or 40-minute drive away, but they would come into town a couple times a month to do her grocery shopping.
She always paid with cash. We swung down, went to the bank, she threw $200 out to go shopping with.
Police ask Howard about Margaret's finances. Was there anyone who stood to gain from her death?
Margaret was really in charge of her own finances. We did look into those accounts and check for activity. We were never able to locate any activity that was out of the normal.
Does she have a power of attorney or a will or anything then?
No. We've been telling her she needs a will, she needs this. She would never get to take the time to do it.
There was nobody that we could find that would have any financial gain from her death.
Could Howard or Cindy think of anyone who might wish to harm Margaret?
Any problems with her? Did she want to argue with people or anything like that? Nothing?
No, sweet old lady.
And nobody else, she didn't, have any problems with anybody that...
Not that I know. She was... Margaret bothered me. That's why it's so just horrible.
Detectives ask about others in close contact with Margaret. According to Howard and Cindy, the closest is Margaret's former neighbor, David Klinkenbeard.
Cindy and Howard did keep in contact with David, who was Margaret's main caregiver. David would come and check on her a couple of times a week just to see if she was okay and if she needed anything.
David has the most contact with her.
Yeah, he'd go every week, take her trash out, and then he'd put the can back in the next day. So.
After interviewing Howard and Cindy, detectives try to contact David, but he's not answering their calls.
There was some concern not being able to reach David, and that was troubling. We didn't have any other suspects. It made us wonder what was going on.
As detectives try to track David down, patrol officers continue to canvass Margaret's neighbors for information.
During the canvass, we did learn that there had been some vehicles in the neighborhood that had been rifled through, and small items were taken out, like change and things like that.
Is this somebody that was up by Margaret's house and found a crime of opportunity because it's somebody that they can maybe figure out lives alone?
As the canvass continues, officers notice someone watching the activity around Margaret's house.
I noticed a man outside smoking a cigarette, so I went out to make contact with him. This person ended up being David Klinkenbeard. He said that he used to live next door to Margaret. He kind of wanted to know what was going on.
He said he was essentially canvassing the neighborhood looking for anything that was suspicious.
David did strike me as odd at first. It was concerning to me that he was standing out there trying to determine what exactly we had found.
As David continues to talk, police grow increasingly suspicious.
He was kind of making comments about information that seemed strange that he would know about.
He knew details of where Margaret was found and in what state she was found. Having people know how she was found and even what she was wearing is very suspicious. You don't know where someone has gotten their information. Were they there? Were they involved in the murder?
With a growing list of questions about David, officers approach Margaret's neighbors for answers.
One of the neighbors had mentioned how they had seen David driving through the neighborhood, but didn't stop, just kind of drove through. So they thought that was kind of strange. Maybe he's coming back to the scene of a crime, whether he's driving back by because he knows what he did and he's having remorse, or maybe trying to get back inside there to get her body out of there and get rid of it, or to look to see if he left anything behind.
David told some of the neighbors that his fingerprints would be all over the house and he would have to get his fingerprints taken, which is not something that people usually say or think.
The next day, David's appearance in local news coverage of the murder raises further alarm bells.
I turned on the news and there he is on TV, talking to the reporters, putting himself out there.
Was this a guilty man's ploy to hide in plain sight?
That seemed out of sorts to us. Generally, when people are grieving a loss, their instinct is not to cooperate with the media, but David seemed very willing to speak with them.
All of these things added together are possible indicators of someone who is purposely trying to insert themselves in the investigation because they're involved in this investigation.
Could David have possibly been involved in Margaret's murder?
At that point, we had some questions about his actions and his knowledge of how Margaret was found.
He definitely became a main point of interest.
On April 11th, 2 days after finding Margaret's body in her own home, police bring her former neighbor, David Klinkenbeard, in for questioning.
David told us that he last saw Margaret when he was helping her with her trash can on Wednesday.
You didn't come by on Thursday or Friday, not Sunday?
No, not till Sunday.
On Sunday, he had gone over to the house and he didn't locate her. He had some concerns that maybe she was upstairs in a state of undress and he didn't want to go up there himself. So he contacted Jan across the street.
And that's when you had Jan come over in case she was upstairs and not decent.
Yeah, Jan went up there and she wasn't up there, and then we looked in the closet up there.
Okay, your friend's missing. That'd be the last thing in your mind, whether they're dressed or not. You would go and look for them throughout the entire house, not go get somebody else.
As the interview continues, David's answers only raise further suspicion.
She likes to look nice, and she was a pretty woman.
Yeah.
When she was younger, she was a redhead.
Oh.
Yeah. And she was really coming back in. She was really kind of like, not thin then, but, you know. I was surprised because she looked back in.
Some of the comments that he made about Margaret, in particular her physical appearance when she was younger, she had just been murdered, and here he is describing her figure and her body type in an interview.
The detective asked David about the calls he made when he couldn't find Margaret.
I think it's my cell phone to call Howard. I got his number on my phone.
Do you have your phone with you?
Yeah.
Would you mind if I had my computer guy just go through and write down the dates of your calls?
I have.
He said he must have left it at home and didn't have it on his person.
It seems strange because, you know, in this day and age, nobody goes anywhere without their cell phone. Their cell phone is always on them.
Investigators must now subpoena David's cell phone records. At the same time, they receive a forensics report from the crime scene.
DNA belonging to Margaret was found on the glove that was discovered outside of Margaret's house.
We believe that the suspect's DNA was on the inside of the glove.
Would you mind if I was able to get a sample of your DNA? We know you're supposed to be in the house. Would that be okay with you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Detectives send David's DNA to compare against that found inside the glove. While they wait for the results, they check David's cell phone data to verify his alibi.
We were able to go through his day-to-day life and see that he likely was not involved, but there was no concrete evidence that we were able to bring to light.
Unlike the phone records, the DNA findings are conclusive. David is not Margaret's killer.
David ended up being, in the end of all this thing, just a friend of hers that was not involved at all.
Sometimes he would say things that didn't really have an explanation. It just took the time and the effort to understand his involvement, and there was reasonable explanation for all of the things that we had concerns about. He just really cared about Margaret and really had concern that he would have an answer as to what happened.
We had to look at David as probably our #1 interest because obviously his strange comments in the beginning about his DNA and fingerprints, plus he's the one that saw her on a regular basis.
Up until that point where you reach a crossroads, you really do have to look at every tiny detail, every possibility.
Detectives turn their attention to the autopsy report, which paints a terrifying picture of Margaret's last moments.
The medical examiner's report on Margaret showed what kind of force was used to kill her in the end. She had contusions to her head, to her face. She had a fracture to her orbital socket. She had a fracture to her C7 vertebrae in her neck. It showed there was a compression there, which broke her neck.
Margaret was not a frail woman. Not just anyone would be able to manually strangle her.
While the autopsy finds no direct evidence of sexual assault, officers continue to suspect otherwise.
Why would her underwear be ripped off of her? They weren't like pulled off, they were torn.
There were other bodily fluids that were mixed in with the swabs from Margaret's body.
The fact that someone took Margaret in such a horrific manner was a very difficult thing to handle.
As homicide detectives regroup to search for new leads, patrol officers alert them to an unusual crime reported in the early morning hours of April 8th, the day before Margaret's body is discovered.
There was a report of a carjacking very near the scene of Margaret Douglas's home. In a community like Wadsworth, we don't have carjackings. That's not a normal call for us.
They happened in such time close to one another that we had to wonder if they were related.
The carjacking victim is a local man named Paul Shalott.
Paul had reported he was driving along and he happened to notice a 19, 20-year-old man limping, like having trouble walking up the street.
Paul had reported to us that he was just being a good Samaritan and picking somebody up that he thought to be injured.
So as he went out to help him, he said the gentleman just slid into the driver's seat and then locked the doors, wouldn't let him in, and took off with his car.
Officers grow suspicious when they quickly locate Paul's car near the site of the carjacking.
The car was found very quickly, and it was found right there in the same area it was taken.
Literally, like, not even a block away from where he had picked this gentleman up, supposedly, and lost his car.
This happened at a building that had cameras on the outside, so we wanted to kind of investigate Paul's story because it just didn't seem quite right. You could see on the video that Paul had been with what appeared to be a young man. The young man was not limping. He did not seem to be injured in any way.
Paul's initial report did not match anything that video said. It just wasn't adding up. He was not being honest and something else was going on.
Why had Paul lied to police? And who was the young man seen in security footage? Had one of them gone on to do something unthinkable?
We had the carjacking, and then we have Margaret's disappearance. It just started making me think a little bit, could this be the guy that could be involved?
Police investigating the murder of 98-year-old Margaret Douglas have a potential new lead after learning of an alleged carjacking in her quiet neighborhood.
Somebody that's willing to perpetrate a crime such as a carjacking makes you really wonder, is this related to a murder that's just happened a couple blocks away?
But when security video proves the victim, Paul Shalott, has lied to police, detectives demand answers.
When I interviewed Paul to get the whole story, he was very nervous, and then he finally started telling us the truth about how he came to be in that area and what really happened. He was on an app trying to meet somebody, and he did come across somebody. He said he worked for a church, and he didn't want them to find out that he's using a site to try to meet up with young men. He didn't want to admit it right away, but they started getting involved sexually in the car. The male subject he picked up, I guess, started getting upset that things weren't going his way.
The young man that he met up with just kind of snapped and took the car, not what Paul had expected when he met this person online.
With Paul finally being honest, detectives change course and ask if he knows anything about the murder of Margaret Douglas.
He was aware of what had happened and that she was a victim of a homicide. But Paul did not know Margaret at all.
He had no ties to her, and real no ties even in that neighborhood. He was just there basically to meet up with somebody that night. Then I started thinking, well, now we need to know who was driving that car, who carjacked him.
Paul was asked for the account information for the app that he used to meet this person on.
He said he couldn't remember the email he used or the password he used to get in there.
Paul was embarrassed about what he had let happen and the fact that he was involved with a young man. He had deleted everything from his phone that was relative to that. We weren't able to recover any of that information.
So we had no way of proving or figuring out who it was that he may have met up with that night.
After hitting another dead lead, frustrated investigators know that public fear is only growing.
There was definitely some fear. There were people that would normally stroll down the street, walk their dogs, let their kids play outside unsupervised, and things like that weren't happening after Margaret's discovery.
And the emotions for everybody were really high and heightened. They're all locking their doors now, and they're really watching for everything. So it was definitely a shock to all of them.
With the community on edge, Margaret's family continues to struggle with their loss.
The hardest part going through all this is the time-consuming and the worrying and waiting for the outcome and you're not sure what's going to happen.
That was hard. You know, none of us are patient, and we all want to know what happened here, why someone would do this.
The reason you're doing what you're doing is for the victim. You want somebody to be held responsible for what they've done.
Believing that the carjacker may be a serial criminal, police take a closer look at the petty crimes reported around Margaret's neighborhood.
The crimes all took place in just a few block area.
Is there somebody in this neighborhood that's committing a whole bunch of crimes for some reason, because we weren't seeing those crimes spreading out throughout the city like we typically would.
You have to wonder if the person who's committing these petty crimes has escalated to commit something more horrific.
On the night of April 13th, 4 days after the discovery of Margaret's body, police received several calls about two young men.
We had received a lot of different calls where people had seen two male subjects running around, creating mischief, doing things at the park, doing things at the church, and in cars.
A couple of young males were taking some type of device that had wheels on the bottom and hanging out in one of the parking lots.
That same night, police respond to a call that changes everything.
It was reported to us that there had been a break-in to a trailer that was at a construction site.
When officers investigate, they get a huge break.
Someone had left their cell phone behind at the trailer.
Does the phone belong to the person responsible for the neighborhood crime spree, including Margaret's murder? Investigators used forensic software to unlock the phone.
The phone came back to a subject that we had been known in our area for different car break-ins and little thefts from cars that happened in our city, and especially over in that area.
He was identified by one of our officers as Zach Thronson. Zach was known to us, and he did have a troubled past. He had been in some more serious trouble, and we were all familiar with him. At this point, we thought that we really needed to bring Zach in and talk to him about what he had been doing that night. Zach was found sleeping in his car at the high school in the parking lot.
As officers bring Zach into the station for an interview, something immediately catches their attention.
Zach had some scratches on his legs, which made me wonder where those came from.
Are they defensive wounds from somebody fighting back against you and scratching you that way? Could they be from something simple, explainable, or evidence into what we were looking into with regards to Margaret Douglas?
Police investigating the murder of Margaret Douglas have connected local teen Zach Thronson to a spate of crimes near her home.
With the carjacking, we know there was supposed to be a young male. Now we have Zach running around, committing these little crimes, all within the same area around the same time frame.
His phone was left behind at the trailer, so we knew for sure that he was involved in the crimes that were all seemingly tied together.
Detectives cut to the chase and ask Zach if he killed Margaret Douglas.
Zach, he owned up for the little things he did, but he denied any knowledge of it or being involved at all.
Detectives steer the interview to the identity of the teen seen with Zach in security footage.
He said that he was out with his friend Gavin Ramsey, and that everything that had happened was all Gavin's idea. Gavin had been the one that was trying to break into the trailer, and that he was just standing by and watching it happen, just a presence during the time that Gavin was committing all the other petty crimes. Zach was definitely distancing himself, so there was some concern that he wasn't being honest about everything that they had done.
For the moment, police decide not to charge Zach until they interview his friend, Gavin Ramsey.
Gavin had been in trouble before, and his mom had dealt with that. She was going to help hold him accountable for the things he had done. We talked about the trailer, and I just let him know that we knew he was there because Zach had told us that he was there. Property-type crimes and less serious crimes is what we talked about at first.
That's just to see, is he going to own up to that? And then we'd continue from there into something more serious.
You guys didn't take anything? Did you rummage through glove boxes or anything?
Maybe like 50 times, but other than that, seriously nothing.
He admitted to all of them. He would rifle through cars and take things that weren't of a lot of value, just to take things.
Gavin told us during the interview, he does it for a rush, so it wasn't about money or anything.
I think the reason that he was so willing to admit to these lesser offenses is to kind of distance himself and clear his name from anything else I might want to talk to him about.
Now, detectives turn their questions to more serious crimes.
We had a carjacking.
Oh my God.
And the suspect is a young white male with a nice complexion and blue eyes. Is that you?
Gavin's demeanor changed substantially when I started to ask him about the carjacking.
That upset me so much. Is there something else you need to tell us?
You've already gotten yourself in trouble, so.
I know, and I don't need I don't know that.
Before answering further questions, Gavin asks to speak with a detective alone.
Can you two actually leave for a second? What's that? Can you two actually leave? So I can talk to her. Yeah.
Sure.
So when his mom stepped out,
the carjacking, it was me, I'm gonna be honest about it, but the way that he explained it, that guy, that's not right.
he openly admitted that he was the one who did the carjacking. But he didn't really want to talk about the sexual part of what happened in there.
You guys didn't talk about what kind of sex you were gonna have, or?
No, I don't know, it's not something I'm interested in, just the act of him getting the payback, I guess, I don't know, that's, like, it's karma, really. Like, if you're gonna do that, then I'm gonna rob you.
Gavin denies that he was truly interested in meeting up with Paul for any reason other than to catfish him or to teach him a lesson.
This is a kid that's admitting to going around breaking into cars, and it's not for theft, it's for a rush, so we know he's after the adrenaline. What else could he have possibly done?
With Gavin admitting to the carjacking, the interview turns to questions about Margaret Douglas.
I specifically asked him if he had murdered Margaret, and he denied it.
There's no reason that we would find your DNA inside her house, because we swabbed the hell out of that house.
You shouldn't.
I mean, if you've never been in there, then obviously we wouldn't. But, I mean, you name it. We swabbed it, we took it. I'm sure you know we were there all night.
Yeah.
He was hiding something. There was more to be said. I didn't feel that this avenue had been exhausted with him. This was something that we probably needed to revisit, maybe from another direction.
For now, detectives allow Gavin to leave with his mother.
At this point, we have nothing other than the petty crimes, which are handled through juvenile court, so we wouldn't actually take him into custody to hold him.
But they have one request for Gavin's mother.
I let her know that we had concerns and that I would like to look at his phone. I was expecting to find information about how maybe Gavin was victimized.
Instead, what officers find on Gavin's phone changes everything.
Officer Cooper discovered Google-type searches, murder in Wadsworth, Margaret Douglas investigation, Wadsworth PD reports on homicide investigation.
Then, detectives find something they never would have imagined.
There were actually photos and videos of Margaret Douglas.
Timestamps show that the images were recorded in the early morning hours of Friday, April 6th.
She obviously didn't know he was there, and he was just photographing her from a vantage point in her own home. There was clearly a point in time where she realized that someone was in her home and was startled.
Nothing can prepare investigators for what they see next.
I was absolutely shocked that a child could imagine doing this to another human being. This wasn't a horror movie. This was actually happening.
Detectives investigating the murder of 98-year-old Margaret Douglas have found disturbing evidence on a phone belonging to 17-year-old Gavin Ramsey.
The first thought in my mind was, he knows we're going to discover this. And I could just imagine him fleeing.
Police moved quickly to take Gavin into custody.
Once we picked him up, I briefly told his mom that we had discovered evidence on his phone and that we were going to take him back to the police department. It was definitely not the easiest interview that I had ever done.
I came up onto the porch, and I didn't even know what I was going to do. I don't know, I felt like going into the house. It's like the biggest adrenaline rush I could get. So then I tried the doorknob, and that just happened to be unlocked.
He was videotaping her while she slept, stalking his victim like an animal stalks its prey.
So how long do you think you were in the house before you woke her up?
I don't know, probably like 10, 15 minutes.
You could see in some of the photos the obvious horror on her face as to what was happening.
And then from the time you woke her up to the time you ended up on top of her, choking her, how long did that whole part take?
That was probably like 5 minutes.
He had used both hands to squeeze her neck and push her neck back against the floor, strangling her. He said that once he realized the gravity of what he was doing, it was too late, that she was already gone.
For officers, the most disturbing questions involve what Gavin did after killing Margaret.
When I saw him, it was just like, this is sick. This is not a normal murder.
The sexual nature of his actions was kind of a topic that he was not willing to talk about.
He degraded her by using her for sexual things and videotaping and taking pictures. He'd actually been in there with her for a while.
And then I checked my phone, and it said it was like 4 something, and I knew my mom had to get up at 5 for work.
So he takes the body, finds the closet, because he has to get home. He throws in there to hide her because I don't want anybody to find her. I don't want anybody to know it's me.
But was Margaret simply a random victim of Gavin's need for a rush? Or had he known her better than he'd initially let on?
Gavin lived very close to Margaret Douglas, right around the corner from her house.
Gavin had actually been to her house before, asking her about maybe cutting her grass, raking leaves, or even, shoveling snow. He was out looking for little odd jobs around the neighborhood.
The thought in the back of my mind was that Gavin had observed Margaret regularly and actually thought about the things that he would like to do and that she would make a good victim.
Police arrest Gavin Ramsey for the murder of Margaret Douglas and get a search warrant for his bedroom.
We found gloves matching the same style and type of glove that was found at the scene.
In one of his drawers, I discovered Margaret's red wallet.
Detectives then make an even more disturbing find.
We also found a journal that had some writings about fantasies about murder. He had written almost like a book report on different serial killers. After reading those, there was no doubt in my mind that Gavin would kill again if he had the opportunity. This is something that he enjoys, that he finds pleasure in.
This is somebody that's ultimately going to be a serial killer if he's not caught.
Because of the heinous nature of the crime, the juvenile penal system is not equipped to deal with an individual such as Gavin Ramsey.
Gavin was ultimately charged as an adult with aggravated murder, 2 other counts of murder, burglary, and abuse of a corpse.
We requested that Mr. Ramsey receive the harshest penalty that the law would allow.
Found guilty on all charges, Gavin is sentenced to life in prison without parole for the murder of Margaret Douglas.
When I watched Gavin Ramsey at the sentencing, I still felt in my mind that he doesn't understand the gravity of what he's done. There's still no remorse there.
You would like to think that the world is full of people like you and I, and don't want to think that of such a young person able to act out something that you would only see in a horror movie.
I was shocked to find out that it was a young person who was still in high school that would do something like this.
To murder somebody who's 98 years old, to think you could shove a body in that closet. I just, that part, I just can't even.
It absolutely made me think of my own grandma. I just could not imagine her living such a wonderful life and having it end in such a horrific way.
Despite the horror of Margaret's death, her family honors her memory by thinking of her remarkable life.
Margaret gave you an inspiration that you can still be 98 years old and be very functional, live in your own home, take care of yourself. She, to me, was just an inspiration.
She led a full life and could have been longer.
Margaret would want to be remembered as the person who took care of herself, cared about those around her, and was willing to do what she needed to do.
My aunt was Margaret Douglas, and she was a wonderful woman. She was a great woman.
A young mother on the verge of a new beginning.
She always used to talk about her wedding. She had everything planned out.
She was gonna be living the life that she's always dreamt of having.
Violently struck down.
Not just homicide, but an act of rage.
I had no idea why somebody would want to do that.
Police chase a deranged killer down a sinister path.
He was a big heroin dealer in Jackson. Someone burnt the house down.
Through a maze of twisted theories.
Maybe this was a retaliation.
It was probably self-induced.
You mean suicide?
Yeah.
Until the case takes a mind-bending turn.
He looked at me and said, "You have it all wrong."
That person never was on our radar.
Just an epic, epic tragedy.
I was almost in disbelief.
That's just something that was entirely unexpected from the beginning.
Until we try to rule them in or rule them out, I don't know that any of us are safe.
On Sunday, August 10th, 2014, in an upper-middle-class neighborhood in Jackson, Michigan, a quiet morning is broken by a desperate phone call.
Our dispatch did receive a 911 call from a panicked individual.
911. Yeah, I need somebody up to my house right now. My fiance, I think she's dead.
Okay, so has she been sick?
No, there's blood everywhere.
Do you know where it's coming from?
I don't know.
Okay, can you tell if she's breathing?
She's not. She's cold. She's dead. Oh my God.
Police race to the home just before 11 a.m., where they're greeted by the caller and 3 young girls.
He had said that the deceased body was up in a bedroom upstairs. There was 2 bedrooms that we walked past, which were bedrooms where the kids had been sleeping.
With the 3 children who lived there safely out of the house and the crime scene locked down, detectives come upon a grisly sight.
As we enter the bedroom, then we do see the body. It was slumped down between the bed and the wall. And there was quite a bit of blood. At that point, we see zip ties on her hands, and we see what appears to be several stab marks.
A zip tie was wrapped around each wrist, with another looped through it and cut, as though she'd been strapped to the bed and then cut loose.
We, at that point, determined we likely had a homicide.
The police talk to Eric Wolf, who placed the 911 call. He tells them the victim is his fiancée, 28-year-old Frances Craig. He also makes a startling admission.
He said that he had worked all night, so when he came home, after finding Franny in the condition she was in, he then went downstairs and slept on the recliner chair. For whatever reason, he did not call 911 until a couple hours later in the morning.
Frances's 2 daughters and Eric's little girl were all in the house at the time. While Eric slept, his 10-year-old child walked into a horrifying scene.
Eric's daughter, Lexi, went into the bedroom and clearly could tell that something was amiss. She even touched her and could tell that she was not moving. I think she might even have described her as a little cold.
Lexi went downstairs and woke up her father. And that's when he finally called 911.
We all felt that a normal, average individual would, at the bare minimum, make sure their fiancé, the person they're about to get married to and spend the rest of their life with, is okay.
Eric's decision to walk away from the murder scene is a red flag for investigators. And so is his casual demeanor.
When Eric was interviewed by one of the other detectives at the scene initially, the detective said he didn't seem too concerned, didn't seem too upset about what had happened.
Detectives plan to grill Eric about his suspicious behavior. But first, they need to finish processing the crime scene.
There was approximately 90 stab wounds, and they were in a very aggressive manner.
It was overkill. Not just committing a homicide, but an act of rage where it's over the top.
The rule of thumb is on a situation where there's multiple, and I'm talking more than a dozen stab wounds, it's usually a crime of passion. So at that point, you typically look at somebody close to the victim.
Investigators sift through the bloody mess for clues. There's no sign of a murder weapon, but plenty of signs of conflict.
The crime lab, which is the CSI people, they responded to the scene. They were there for multiple hours, collecting a ton of evidence.
While the forensics team works the scene inside. Shocked friends and family have gathered outside the house.
I didn't believe her. I thought it was a lie. It's not real. It didn't happen. I had no idea why somebody would want to do that. Frances was just an amazing person all around. Frances and I worked together. We hung out outside of work together. We would hang out with our kids.
Investigators learned that Frances had 2 daughters with an ex-boyfriend. The oldest is 5 years old, and the youngest is 3.
Our boyfriends actually were friends, and he brought her to my house one day, and that was like the beginning of a beautiful friendship. It felt like we've known each other for years. She's a wonderful, amazing mom, the best mom that I know. She was the best person I've ever met and known in my life.
She would do anything for anyone.
Frances and the father of her children broke up, but she still dreamed of getting married.
She always used to talk about her wedding and everything, and at this point, she didn't even have a boyfriend. She had everything planned out.
Dreams became reality in 2012 when she started dating 29-year-old Eric Wolf.
Eric was a divorced single father, 1 young child. He had primary custody over her.
2 years into the relationship, Eric and Frances moved in together. Despite working 2 jobs, Frances did all she could to make time for her children and Eric's daughter, too.
She was constantly doing things with her girls when she wasn't working. Even with her stepdaughter, she was amazing.
Her days were long, but her life was full. Eric proposed, and the couple bought a house together.
Frances was very, very excited about getting married. Like, every day she was tagging me on Facebook or, like, sending me pictures. You know, she thought she was gonna be living the life that she's always dreamt of having and having that fairy tale wedding.
But when detectives pressed Franny's friends, they learned that Eric had a dark side.
They told me that they weren't super fond of her fiance.
Because my daughter spent a lot of time with Frances. She was like a second mother to my daughter. And my daughter did tell me several times of Eric being kind of like a drill sergeant. He seemed real cocky, just everything was about him and his daughter more so than Frances and her girls. I felt in my gut from the moment I found out that something happened to Frances, I felt like Eric had something to do with it. I didn't know what, I didn't know how, I didn't know why. I just felt like it was because of him that she's gone.
Police are determined to get to the bottom of Eric's suspicious behavior.
When we interviewed him, he stated when he saw her in the condition she was in, he did not call 911, and he didn't seem too upset about what had happened. At that point, he was somebody, definitely a person of interest in the homicide of Franny Craig.
Coming up, Eric's story gets stranger by the minute.
I didn't know if this was, you know, like self-inflicted accident. That's what we need to find out too.
A tiny clue reveals a big surprise.
There was DNA found on Franny's zip tie.
And when police find the killer, it shocks everyone.
I remember thinking to myself, I'm glad we're sitting down right now.
After calling 911 following the brutal murder of his fiancée, Frances Craig, Eric Wolf is questioned by police about how he discovered his fiancée's body.
I came home this morning because I work 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. I went upstairs, I checked both the girls' rooms before going in our bedroom.
Okay, so you came around to the foot of the bed and kind of looked to see where she was at.
That's exactly what I did.
Okay. Did you see anything on the mattress when you first came in?
I saw, I guess I might have saw that streak, but it didn't jump out like blood or anything.
Okay, so you saw something that just didn't jump out to you.
Yeah,
This is bad.
Eric did not seem to register surprise, anger, hurt, anything that I think we all normally would want to see from a loved one when somebody is killed.
I thought maybe she had been drinking or something because she was in like almost like a funny position on the floor, which she doesn't drink hardly ever. I knew better than to wake her. I know from prior experience whenever I've woken her up, she's not a morning person and I get yelled at.
As the interview creeped close to an hour, Eric suggests a much darker reason for ignoring his fiancée, sprawled out on the bedroom floor.
Up until just now, maybe since we've been here, I thought that if it wasn't an accident, then it was probably self-induced.
You mean suicide?
Yeah.
He indicated that he thought maybe she had committed suicide and just did not want to deal with it at that point. We found that being very odd and a red flag. Typically on a suicide, you'll find one stab wound or one gunshot wound. You won't find multiple stab wounds.
The prospect of Franny inflicting 90 stab wounds with her hands zip-tied sounds preposterous to the police. Even if it was physically possible, why wouldn't Eric have reacted with alarm?
So you didn't want to come to grips with it if she had done so. Right, because you don't want to.
To investigators, Eric's shifting story doesn't add up. Why would a woman everyone described as happy and carefree take her own life?
And the only reason I say self-induced is just because of how high-strung everything is right before this wedding, and
it's a lot of stress.
Yeah.
Eric's strange comments could signal that he's traumatized over the death of his fiancée, or that he's hiding something. Determined to mine the truth, detectives decide to go right at their prime suspect.
Did you?
No.
Know what?
No, I didn't do this. I didn't know anything about it. I walked in and I walked out, went to sleep, got up, went back in and reported it.
But that brings me back to the questions we just asked. You made it at least halfway into that bedroom.
I did make it, and I admit that, and I'll admit that in front of whoever needs to hear it. But I want to make that perfectly clear that my stance on this is exactly what I said. I went in for whatever reason it was. I didn't react.
Without forensic evidence to hold him, Eric is free to go. But investigators vow to keep their eye on him. And the deeper they look, the more circumstantial evidence starts to build up.
We did do a pretty thorough background, as we always do. And one thing we found out is that Eric did have a little bit of assaultive past with prior girlfriends and an ex-wife. It seems like he has some violent tendencies.
One of the strangest facts in this case is that Eric Wolf has a father who is serving a life sentence in prison for his own first-degree murder conviction.
He was convicted on a cold case homicide investigation in the 90s and was serving life in prison for murder. So that certainly put up a red flag to us.
Was it possible that violent tendencies run in the family? Even if they did, what possible reason would Eric have to want his fiancée dead?
The homicide occurred in August, and I believe their wedding was planned in September. We talked with her parents and her friends. They told me that Franny had second thoughts, and they were trying to convince her that if she was not prepared to get married, that maybe she should wait. And they also said Eric had second thoughts. Eric may have got cold feet, didn't want to get married, didn't know how to end the relationship.
While police work diligently to prove Eric's guilt, Frances's friends wait and wonder.
We didn't know what was going on. Nobody knew what was going on and what happened with Frances. and how she was murdered. We just knew she was dead.
Behind the scenes, police work tirelessly. They obtain a search warrant to collect Frances's and Eric's electronics, but quickly realize that Frances's cell phone is missing.
We do find the cell phone near Franny's house. It had been thrown up against a tree and damaged. Again, we're thinking that the cell phone has some pretty valuable information.
The cellular phone data quite often can be some of the most compelling evidence.
We were able to get the phone records, and nothing really stuck out as being her, Franny communicating with anybody that would give us suspicion.
With no unusual cell phone activity or signs of forced entry on the day of the murder, police stay focused on Eric.
Eric Wolf at the time was at work, and investigators went and checked out, what they could to verify his alibi.
Police checked the company's security cameras.
They do have one entrance. They do have a time card check-in, check-out system. We're able to verify he was at work, or allegedly at work, when the incident occurred. The problem with the system is there's some other exits that they're not supposed to use, but some of them have cameras, but other ones do not.
Was he able to leave his place of employment and get home to commit a murder and have all of that be undetected? Eric was the only person we could figure who would have any reason to want Franny dead.
Police investigating the homicide of 28-year-old Frances Craig cannot confirm her fiancé's alibi, since not every exit at his workplace had a security camera.
We couldn't rule out that sometime during the night he left and then came back.
Eric's shaky alibi and suspicious behavior at the crime scene doesn't give police enough to arrest him, but it does leave them with a drastic course of action.
If you are operating in a murder investigation thinking that man killed his fiancée in the home where the children were, you are thinking, we want to keep the children safe. We kept Eric's daughter from him while we tried to figure out what happened to Franny.
Both Eric's and Franny's daughters are removed from Eric's home and put in the custody of family members. With pressure mounting, detectives need to move fast to prove their theory, or find a more plausible one.
At that point, we tried to determine any communication Franny may have been having with someone other than her fiancé.
Franny had an ex-boyfriend. He no longer lived in the area, but he had returned to the area recently and had some level of connection or interaction with Franny.
The police press Franny's ex. Could he have committed this heinous crime?
That young man was a nice young man, came from a very, very nice family.
And he did have an alibi where he was at the time of the incident. We were able to verify that alibi, so we were able to eliminate him.
If no one in Frances's immediate circle wished her harm, what about her coworkers? Detectives learned that while Frances worked at a retail store, she was involved in a frightening incident.
Where Franny was working, there was a couple shoplifters that had stolen some clothing. She confronted them.
The confrontation turned to violence when the mother of the two young shoplifters jumped in, attacking Frances. The assault left Frances with a severe eye injury, as well as emotional scars.
The incident at work left Frances really scared, nervous, cautious.
The mother of the shoplifters was actually criminally charged for a crime for the assault, some type of unarmed robbery. She was convicted.
So there was some concern that maybe this was a retaliation for that situation.
We did surprise them with a visit. They did have alibis on where they would have been at that time that the incident occurred.
Investigators are able to verify those alibis, eliminating the women as suspects. Frustrated detectives are still hoping that DNA from the crime scene will help them find the killer. But while they wait for results from the crime lab, the people of Jackson attend Franny's funeral, their emotions raw from the news of her violent death.
Her mail carrier showed up to her funeral because she left such an impact on that person. That's how loved and how missed Frances Craig is.
This was definitely a shock to the community because we don't have that many homicides.
I was scared. I just didn't know what to expect.
I was afraid to leave the house. I was afraid to do anything because we still had no answers as to what happened.
The overwhelming feeling was the pressure we were under to get this right.
Determined to find justice for Franny, investigators continue to drill down on Frances's fiance. Hoping for an inside look at Eric Wolf, they bring in one of the couple's former roommates.
Ryan Marshall was friends with Eric Wolf. So Eric and Franny welcomed Ryan into their home to stay with them.
His house had caught on fire, and she was trying to help a friend out.
He lived with them until April of 2014. The homicide happened August of 2014, so he had a pretty good knowledge of the two of them. He said everything was good, and he actually vouched for Eric, saying Eric was a really good guy and a friend for a long time, and doesn't feel that Eric would ever do anything to harm Franny.
Speaking with Ryan doesn't give police new reasons to suspect Eric, but it doesn't clear him either.
3 months in, we've pretty much eliminated everybody of interest, anyone close to Franny other than Eric. But we don't have enough evidence to present to the prosecutor.
But then, a new piece of information arrives that brings a new suspect into the spotlight.
There was DNA found on Franny's zip tie.
Three months after Frances Craig's murder, the lab results from the crime scene finally arrive, and they provide a huge break in the case.
We're notified through a national index. The DNA located on the zip ties matched DNA in a database.
When somebody commits a felony, they have to submit to a DNA test. Somebody's DNA showed up on the zip ties that were used in the homicide. We get a name of Cortez Butler.
Who is Cortez Butler? Police waste no time looking into his criminal record.
We find out Cortez Butler served approximately 25 years for murder and was currently on parole in the Detroit area.
But we knew almost nothing else. We tried to determine if we could connect Cortez Butler to Franny Craig, to Eric Wolf, and we came up with nothing. We tried to determine if he had family locally, and we came up with nothing.
In fact, Cortez Butler appears to have no connection to Jackson whatsoever.
So we look in our database to see if we have any Cortez Butlers in any police report we've done, any place in Jackson County, and we find none.
Then it was this mad scramble of, well, then how do we even tie Cortez Butler to this? For all we know, he may have worked at Home Depot. and his DNA may be on these zip ties for a completely innocent reason.
The investigators connected with Cortez's parole officer. They got Cortez's phone number. A search warrant was prepared and signed for Cortez Butler's phone records. We learned that Cortez Butler's phone was in Jackson on the early morning hours of August 10th, the actual time of the murder. The rest of those phone records almost exclusively placed it in and around the greater Detroit area, never in Jackson.
But what reason would Butler have to harm Franny?
Eric remained the prime suspect. He was the only dude with a motive.
Maybe Eric was not ready to get married and didn't know how to end a relationship.
So then the thought process was, did Eric hire this person to kill Franny?
The cell phone records also connect Butler to some other shady characters.
We were able to identify a Clifford and Rodney McKee as being connected to Cortez Butler. Clifford McKee lived in the Detroit area. Clifford McKee was in prison for approximately 20 years for murder. We found out that Rodney McKee, he was a big heroin dealer in Jackson. We found out that he had committed an arson.
The arson that Rodney McKee perpetrated was against Donna and Ryan Marshall.
The police are stunned. Ryan Marshall is Eric Wolf's friend, the one who had been welcomed into Franny and Eric's home after his house burned down. But what kind of a connection could Ryan possibly have to a drug dealer like Rodney McKee?
Ryan Marshall's mother had been a heroin dealer for Rodney McKee.
But after months of dealing for Rodney, Ryan's mother decided she wanted out.
Donna Marshall refused to sell heroin for Rodney McKee.
Rodney didn't like to be told no.
Ryan's mother, Donna, held her ground, but Rodney retaliated.
Rodney McKee attempted to burn down a house with Ryan Marshall and his mother in it.
Ryan witnessed it all. He then contacted the police.
What was the connection between Eric Wolf, Cortez Butler, the Marshalls, and a drug dealer from Detroit? Detectives knew there was only one person who could answer the question, and soon they'd have a chance to ask him face to face.
Cortez Butler was arrested for yet another murder. Not Franny's murder, but another murder in the greater Detroit area.
We went down there in Detroit with one sole purpose: to gather information from Cortez Butler on what happened to Franny and hopefully be able to explain to us what Eric's role in this whole thing was. But Cortez said he wasn't going to talk without any kind of a deal.
It was clear that whatever Cortez was going to say, it was not going to be, quote unquote, on the record.
Investigators have DNA evidence and phone records that link convicted killer Cortez Butler to Francis Craig's murder. They arrange to talk to him while he's detained for an unrelated homicide. But he immediately tries to shut them down.
Cortez said he wasn't going to talk without any kind of a deal. I said, no one is giving you any kind of a deal without anyone knowing what you have to say.
Detectives press Butler hard until he finally agrees to talk. But only on one condition.
Cortez very pointedly and specifically asked repeatedly to not have the interview recorded.
If detectives agree not to record the interview, there's a chance Butler's testimony won't stand up in court. Still, with no other leads in the case, they decide to roll the dice.
We were there interviewing Cortez in the first place because we need to find out Eric Wolf's involvement in this. And it was dire that we did so as the children were about to go back with Eric Wolf. The whole idea for that was to keep these kids safe.
So the detectives tried to read him his rights. He didn't even want to be bothered with the rights. I know my rights. I think it was, bro, I know my rights, bro.
Butler wastes no time getting right to the point.
Cortez looked at me and said, "You have it all wrong." And I said, "Have what all wrong?" And he, at that time, let us know that Eric had absolutely nothing to do with this murder.
He goes, "I don't know this dude you're talking about, know nothing about him. Just trust me, he was not involved in this whatsoever."
The statement contradicts one of the investigators' strongest leads, but the next thing Butler says is even more explosive.
Cortez identifies himself as the killer. I remember thinking to myself, I'm glad we're sitting down right now, because I was almost in disbelief.
If Eric wasn't involved, why had this cold-blooded criminal murdered a woman to whom he had no obvious connection? It all went back to Rodney McKee's arson case.
Rodney McKee attempted to burn down a house with Ryan Marshall and his mother in it. Ryan Marshall was a key witness in his arson case.
He made some threats to Ryan that either he not agree to testify or he was going to be killed.
Cortez told us that he had been hired by Rodney McKee to kill Ryan Marshall.
First, Butler had to find Ryan, who was homeless because of the fire.
So we found out from Cortez Butler that they had bad information. They had information that Ryan Marshall was living with Francis Craig and Eric Wolf.
Cortez Butler entered Francis and Eric's house to kill someone who was no longer there.
Franny wasn't even the intended target. Franny was as innocent of a victim as anybody could ever be. When he opened the door, he had made the decision that he was killing somebody while he was there.
He doesn't have to force entry. He gets into the house. He noticed the bedrooms have some kids in it. He walks past them, and he goes to Franny Craig's room. When he gets to Franny Craig's room, he asks her where Ryan is. She said he's not there. Cortez tells Franny not to look at him. In his words, he stated she looked at him, so he had to kill her.
The horrific details that Cortez reveals next leave detectives with no doubt about the guilt of the man sitting across from them.
He decided to bind her, trying to get information from her, but she would not cooperate.
Cortez stabbed her multiple times.
We will never know how long he took to torture her and butcher her. And it clearly took time and effort to stab and slice her in the manner that he did. She died in the service of keeping Ryan's identity and his location secret, and/or she, quite frankly, just didn't know.
Cortez Butler's chilling confession is nothing short of a game changer, both for detectives and for Eric Wolf.
It eliminated our hypothesis that Eric Wolf was responsible for Franny's death.
Eric wasn't involved. He's an odd duck kind of guy.
Eric was able to regain custody of his daughter.
I took from this case that we can never jump to conclusions. I was pretty convinced that he did it, not to the point that I could charge him, but I was pretty convinced I had the right person.
Now that investigators do have the right person, they're determined to put Cortez Butler away for life. But all of that is in jeopardy.
I didn't believe that Cortez's confession would be legally admissible in court because it wasn't recorded. And if Cortez Butler ever walked free again, I don't know that any of us are safe.
After months of dead ends, investigators finally have a confession from Francis Craig's killer. But prosecutors are concerned that his testimony may not hold up in court.
I was concerned that it would be legally inadmissible because it wasn't recorded. He was basically told, we're not planning to use this in court against you. I was concerned that he had not been properly advised of his Miranda rights. But we still had his DNA on the zip ties and the cell phone records. So I kept thinking, and I finally got myself legally to a point where I was convinced that we need to give this a shot.
In October of 2015, Cortez Butler is charged with Francis's murder. When the trial begins 6 months later, Butler appears relaxed, almost giddy.
Cortez really seemed to thrive in that trial atmosphere. He would seek out cameras and smile at them, give them this big, full teeth smile.
He wanted to fight just because he could. He wanted to run the show just because he could.
But that's just a warm-up for the verbal assault he launches into when he takes the stand.
Cortez Butler was a monster at that trial. He bragged on how many bodies he had. It was unbearable.
Butler gleefully describes his murderous past in gory detail. But when asked about killing Francis, he fiercely denies it.
He clearly was so excited to say why he didn't commit this murder because he pleads to all of his murders, and he clearly didn't commit this one because he didn't plead to it.
Butler also denies ever confessing to police. But in a victory for prosecutors, the judge allows detectives to testify about Butler's confession.
We're able to get past that piece because he wasn't in custody for our case. He wasn't actually entitled to his Miranda warnings.
Eyewitness accounts play a major role in trying to move the jury, beginning with Eric's daughter, who found Franny dead.
Alexis was our first witness up there, and I don't know that I will ever forget the audible gasps and sobs and emotion pouring from the jury just from that first witness.
The physical evidence is laid out.
We have Cortez Butler's DNA on the zip ties that were used in the homicide, and we also have phone tracking information showing Cortez Butler and Jackson.
Prosecutors make a compelling case, but without a recording of Butler's confession, it's the detective's word against Butler's. When the jury returns with the verdict, there's no guarantee which way the cards will fall.
Cortez Butler was convicted of first-degree murder, and he won't ever walk free again.
The sentence was life without the possibility of parole for the premeditation murder of Franny Craig.
This was a complicated story to tell to a jury. It is a difficult one for all of us to wrap our brains around, even still.
Cortez goes to look for Ryan at her house, and he doesn't find him, and murders Franny in her own bed while she's doing nothing wrong.
Franny had no connection to her killer whatsoever. We can rest maybe a little easier that the bad guys won't ever hurt anybody else, at least not outside of the walls of prison. But none of it brings Franny back.
Today, Francis's 2 daughters live with their father. Those closest to Francis do everything they can to hold on to her memory.
Franny's family, I know, they've been lost ever since. I've been lost ever since Francis has been murdered.
I want people to remember how happy of a person she was, how generous, how nice and kind she was.
I miss Francis so much, and there's not a day that goes by that I do not think about her. I know that she's watching over everybody and making sure that everybody's good, because that's the type of person she was.
I wish I had known her, and I hope I honored her in my handling of this case.
For more information on an unexpected killer, go to Oxygen.com. An all-American woman.
She was a beautiful young gal, and she had a great personality.
She was amazing. She was so kind and so caring. She was my sister. She was my everything.
Is found murdered in her bedroom.
She had been strangled quite violently.
Whoever the killer was crushed the victim's neck.
Police hunt for the culprit.
I had in my mind who committed the crime.
We were convinced that he was our guy.
But the prime suspect slips from their grasp.
I don't get it. Did he really get away with it?
Decades later, leaps in forensic science reignite the investigation.
We're not giving up on the case. Is there a smoking gun? We got to find it.
I figured that if this case could be solved, it could be solved now.
And new evidence leads to a killer no one saw coming.
It was shocking, it was unexpected, and guess what? We have a new suspect.
I was stunned. I was like, really?
In the early morning hours of June 6, 1980, the peaceful suburb of Woods Cross, Utah, is shaken by a frantic 911 call.
Emergency? Oh my God! What's the problem? My wife's been killed. I just got home from work. Okay, I'll see. What's your name? Steve Strong. Please hurry.
Woods Cross had never had a homicide. This was the first one, and it definitely was not something we were used to.
Police respond to the modest home on the outskirts of Salt Lake City.
Well, I got called to respond to this house that they'd said there had been a homicide. So I went into the bedroom area where the victim was, laying on the floor, kind of laying up against the bed. She appeared that she was in her sleeping clothes, just a little t-shirt and a pair of panties. First thing that I noticed, she had bruising and scratches on her neck area that looked like she had been strangled, and been strangled quite violently. In fact, I believe that she had put up quite a struggle and quite a fight. Torn fingernails and some bruising on her legs and her feet. It was an indication she fought pretty hard. It looked like she had been knocked off of the bed and onto the floor. 2 or 3 of the rungs in the bed that had been broken out. So it was obvious that there was a pretty good struggle had taken place there.
Police searched the rest of the house, looking for clues to what happened.
And looking around, I didn't believe that there could have been a robbery or anything of that nature because everything else was in place.
It did not look like a robbery or theft. This looked more like a personal attack. This looked more like that she was the target of her killer.
Investigators turned to Steve Strom, the man who had called 911. He tells police the victim is his wife, 25-year-old Karen Strom.
Talking to Steve, he was kind of hysterical, just very upset that his wife was dead.
Steve worked at a manufacturing plant on the graveyard shift.
He said everything was fine when he left the house the night before to go to work. He worked the night shift till about 7 in the morning. And when he got home, he walked into the bedroom and saw his wife.
While investigators continue their hunt for clues, police inform Karen's family of the tragic news.
I was at work at the phone company. My stepmother called me and said, "Your sister's dead." I said, "What? What happened?" She goes, "We don't know yet." That was heart-wrenching. I wanted to know what happened to my sister.
Karen Saltzgiver was born in Bountiful, Utah in 1954, the oldest of 3 children.
Karen and I were 5 years apart. My parents divorced when we were younger, and that's always rough on kids. It was a struggle. But Karen was always there, playing mom, and I think it was just her nurturing instinct. She was amazing. She was strong.
In 1973, Karen married Steve Strom right out of high school at the age of 18.
Karen and Steve were high school sweethearts. Karen was very outgoing, very fun, very loving, and Steve was very quiet. She saw something in him. They used to go four-wheel driving a lot and up in the mountains a lot. It was a sense of freedom for her, and Karen loved nature.
Over the next 7 years, the young couple worked hard to build a life of their own.
Steve worked at a machine shop. Karen worked in accounting for the state of Utah. And they had an apartment in North Salt Lake, and then they bought a house in Woods Cross. It was a family-oriented place, and it was a new development. She was so excited because she got a house and a good job. You know, she had her Camaro and yellow. Yellow was her favorite color. It seemed like her life was on the right path.
Karen's seemingly perfect marriage had a troubling hidden side.
Steve liked to drink, and I think that's what caused a lot of the problems in their marriage. When Steve wasn't drinking, he was very quiet, but when he drank, yeah, there was a whole nother side of him that came out. He was mean. What I witnessed with Steve was a lot of screaming and yelling, and then he'd leave. Mostly what I witnessed with Steve and my sister was the aftermath. She had bruises, and Karen got good at hiding the bruises with makeup, but it's like, you could see them. You know, to me, I didn't understand. Karen defended Steve all the time. He's just going through a bad time. Things are rough. You know, he'll get over it. It's okay.
But 3 months prior to Karen's murder, something changed between her and Steve.
Karen finally had enough, told Steve she wanted a divorce, and I thought, yes, yes. I just wanted the best for her, because she wanted that for me.
But before Karen can move on, her life is brutally cut short.
My world had just fallen apart. My world was crushed. She was my everything. She was my sister, my protector. She was my best friend.
As Coco struggles to come to grips with Karen's death. Back at the crime scene, police continue their search for clues to who may have attacked Karen during the night.
There was no indication anybody had broke into the house. The next door neighbor said that she had heard nothing. Steve had calmed down by that time. He said that he had found the doors locked, and when he got home, used his key and went into the house.
As Steve is being questioned, Coco arrives looking for answers.
The police didn't give me any details on exactly what happened. They did say that she had been strangled. Then they brought her body out in a black bag, and oh, that just tore me up. It's like, that's my sister, don't put her in there. Steve was sitting there, and I just looked at him like, he finally did it. There was no doubt in my mind that Steve did it.
When Coco got to the house there, the first thing she said, he did it, he finally did it, he killed her.
Anytime you have an incident like this, always start with the husband.
Coming up, detectives discover a tangle of relationships.
Steve said that everything was going great with him. It was pretty obvious that it was not.
Failing the polygraph was pretty damning.
Before their hunt for a killer produces a jaw-dropping twist.
An innocent person just wouldn't flee.
We were worried if we came to the door, he was going to shoot us.
And a new suspect with a dark past emerges.
He raped a girl, and then he stabbed her with a screwdriver and left her for dead.
Who is this guy, and how did he know my sister?
Police in Woods Cross, Utah are investigating the murder of 25-year-old Karen Strong. Her sister, Coco, has told police she suspects Karen's husband, Steve Strong, is the one that killed her.
Coco had been really close with Karen, and they talked a lot. And she had expressed that Steve was a heavy drinker, and when he got drunk or he'd been drinking, he got mean, he got abusive. Coco didn't like him at all.
Detectives learn how Karen had decided to end things with Steve 3 months ago.
She filed for divorce, and then she moved out to my stepmother's house.
Coco says that Karen was only at the house the night she was killed because she felt sorry for Steve.
It was his birthday and their anniversary. Steve had called her and said, "Can you come out and we'll just have dinner together?" And she did, because of her kind heart.
Coco believed that their relationship was over, although Karen agreed to come back and just kind of stay with him for a couple of days.
Recently separated from Steve, Karen had a new suitor named Buff.
Karen told me a little about Buff, that she met this guy that was really different, and he treated her really kind. And I don't know if she thought it would go anywhere, but I know it meant the world to her. He showed her that she could be treated decent and that she deserved it.
Coco said that Steve was also a very jealous person, and in her mind, she was sure that he had killed her.
I said, how could it be anybody else? It was, it was Steve.
Detectives confront Steve Strom about Coco's allegations.
He consistently stated that he had a good relationship with his wife and that there was no abuse.
Steve felt that the only reason that they were getting a divorce, it was his drinking. He said that they had worked things out and that they were going to get back together, and she was not going to go through with the divorce.
Investigators ask Steve to account for his movements leading up to when he last saw Karen alive.
Steve said that he and Karen had gone out to dinner earlier that evening, and then they'd come home and watch TV, and then he got ready and left for work.
If Steve is telling the truth, Karen was killed sometime after midnight when Steve left for work, and before 7 a.m. when he returned home to find her body. Detectives ask, if the doors were locked during that time, how did Karen's killer get into the house?
Steve gave us the name of about 4 or 5 people that she might have opened the door for, but had indicated probably the one that she would really open the door for after she went to bed would have been Buff.
Steve admits that he knew Karen had been dating Buff while they were separated.
Steve said that the relationship with Karen and Buff was over, and that they were getting back together and make another go of their marriage.
With nothing concrete to hold him, detectives let Steve go. After police release Steve, the news that Karen was murdered spreads through Karen's family.
It just broke everybody's heart. My mom, that was her oldest daughter. She couldn't deal with it. She just shut down and shut off. It was just heart-wrenching, and it was something that was so surreal. I was trying to wrap my head around, she's really gone?
As Karen's loved ones reel from the murder, detectives head to the factory where her husband, Steve, works as a machinist to confirm his timeline and verify his story.
I talked to the supervisor and got copies of his time card, and as far as anybody there could remember, he was on his machine the entire time.
Despite confirming that Steve was at work when he said he was, investigators cannot dismiss their suspicion of him without a better idea of when Karen had been killed.
That timeline was very important to the case because we'd be able to tell who had opportunity during that time.
As detectives continue their investigation at Steve's workplace, one of Steve's co-workers they speak with is 29-year-old Ed Owens.
Steve Strom had named Ed Owens as one of the individuals that Karen would have allowed in. Ed and Steve were not only co-workers, but they had become friends. They socialized together, socialized with their spouses. Both of them liked to drink, and so they oftentimes did it together.
There was an incident where Steve would end up so intoxicated that Ed and Karen had to take Steve home and carry him into the house and put him to bed.
Ed tells detectives that he was working the shift before Steve arrived that night, but had left the plant for his meal break around 8 p.m.
Ed had said that he had left work and then gone to the local bar to get his lunch, and he started drinking with some friends till they closed the bar, and then went out in the parking lot and continued drinking.
Ed came back to the plant about 4:30 in the morning. He was obviously intoxicated. Steve had actually offered Ed a ride home, but Ed had refused and drove home intoxicated.
As investigators talk to Ed, something about his appearance draws their attention.
I did notice that he had some scratches on his arm and close to his eye on the nose.
Detectives question Ed about the scratches. Could he have been scratched while he attacked Karen?
He explained those as he worked on the lathe and there was the shavings. He was always kind of getting scratches or cuts on his thing. Talked to the supervisor at his work, and he indicated that happens quite frequently.
Just to be sure, detectives ask Ed's co-workers to confirm he was drinking with them the night of the murder.
I interviewed the people he was hanging out with, and they all stated that he was there, and he didn't have any motive as far as I could determine.
With Ed's alibi confirmed, investigators turn their attention to the other man in Karen's love life, her boyfriend, Buff. Did he have motive for murder?
Steve Strom told the police they were reconciling. So then we have to begin to question Karen's termination of that relationship with Buff.
If they were going to get back together, Buff would have been upset about that. His attitude might have been, if he couldn't have her, nobody else would.
Less than a day after 25-year-old Karen Strom is found strangled to death, police in Woods Cross, Utah have ruled out her husband's friend, Ed Owens, as the killer.
There was no indication that Ed had been involved in the death of Karen.
But despite verifying his alibi, detectives do keep Karen's estranged husband, Steve Strom, on the suspect list.
Her sister Coco talked about how abusive he had been and that Karen needed to get out of that relationship.
Now, investigators want to speak with the man Karen started dating shortly after separating from Steve.
Buff Bangeter was a man who Karen Strom had had some degree of a relationship with, and so, of course, law enforcement had reason to talk to Buff.
Detectives begin the interview with the 35-year-old mechanic by informing him of Karen's murder.
He seemed upset when he found out that she had been killed.
Then, Buff stuns investigators by revealing just how serious his relationship with Karen had become.
According to Buff, they had wanted to get married, and it was Buff that persuaded her to go back to see Steve to be sure that what she wanted to do was get the divorce.
Detectives ask Buff where he was on the night Karen was killed.
Buff stated he was at home that whole evening and he would not have harmed her in any way. And he also made the comments that he thought it was Steve. According to Buff, it was pretty obvious that he was very angry about Buff's relationship with Karen.
Even with no one to back up his alibi, police decide to let Buff go.
We didn't eliminate him entirely, but after we interviewed and talked to Buff, we felt pretty confident that he was not the one who had committed that crime. I couldn't place anyone else having done the crime except for Steve. He remained my #1 suspect.
While they wait for crime lab analysis to be completed, detectives keep digging into the people Karen may have let into the house the night she was killed.
I interviewed each of the individuals who Steve indicated that he thought she might let in, took blood samples from each of them. I covered all the bases that I could.
Investigators also received the forensics report from the crime scene.
Crime lab went clear through the house and checking for fingerprints, and there was no fingerprints in the house that they could find other than Steve Strom and Karen. And that was pretty damaging as far as evidence towards Steve.
Karen's autopsy results also come back and show no evidence of sexual assault, but do confirm strangulation as the cause of death.
Whoever the killer was crushed the victim's neck. This was an aggressive, violent, vicious attack. Karen was scratching and clawing and fighting for her life.
Karen's fingernails are clipped and preserved.
As far as DNA back in 1980, there was not a lot more that they could do. The testing you could do with any sort of evidence was very limited.
The autopsy also provides an idea of when Karen was killed.
The approximate time of death was between 10 p.m. on the night of the 5th and 2 a.m. on the morning of the 6th.
This means it was possible Karen was killed before Steve left to go to work.
The time of death did not give Steve a strong alibi.
By his own statements, it was after midnight when he went to work, so he was at home during that period of time.
Armed with this new information, investigators reach out to get Steve in for another interview, and he makes a surprise request.
Steve requested to take a polygraph. He said that he was innocent, he didn't kill his wife. Polygraphs are not admissible into court, but it would also have been a good tool to see if he was lying or not. We did a polygraph and asked him if he knew who killed his wife, if he killed his wife, and if she was dead when he went to work. According to the polygraph operator, on those particular questions, he was extremely negative as far as being truthful.
Failing the polygraph was pretty damning to Steve, and we were more and more convinced that Steve was involved in this murder.
Detectives still need more evidence in order to charge Steve with Karen's murder.
I interviewed some of the people she worked with. They had indicated that numerous times saw her with bruises when she came to work. At one time, that she had bruises on her neck, and that she made a comment to them that Steve had choked her. She felt that she was lucky to be alive.
The co-worker's account is the final evidence police need to charge Steve, and a warrant is issued for his arrest.
We went to arrest him at work, but he was not there. One of the co-workers told us Steve was with a friend down in North Salt Lake in an apartment. They had indicated that he was worried that we were coming after him. He was possibly going to be violent and resist arrest. We were worried that if we came to the door, he was going to shoot us.
Police proceed to the apartment address with caution and establish a safety perimeter around the building.
We knew he had guns, that he might be violent. We were anticipating the possibility of it being a very difficult arrest.
Police investigating the murder of Karen Strom are preparing to arrest their main suspect, her estranged husband, Steve.
He had been known to have a weapon. It was a .357 Magnum. We was told that Steve had also made a comment to one of his co-workers that if the police come to get him, he was going to take a couple of pigs with him.
Having that information made us feel very nervous about approaching him.
Police maintain their distance, fearful of a violent confrontation.
There was a SWAT team that was organized that had surrounded the apartment. After several phone calls into the apartment, Steve wasn't cooperative.
Steve refuses to answer police phone calls. 3 hours tick by without a resolution before Steve finally answers.
Finally, he was convinced to come out peacefully.
2 months after his wife was killed, Steve is finally arrested for Karen's murder. The news quickly spreads to her loved ones.
The whole family, when they found out Steve was arrested, kind of breathed a sigh of relief. Good. You know, it was one step closer to being over.
After 2 months of investigation, prosecutors believe they have enough evidence to convict Steve of killing his 25-year-old wife.
There was significant pieces of evidence that pointed at Steve Strong circumstantially. It appeared that he had opportunity, didn't have a good alibi. He had motivation, potentially jealousy. He had history of domestic violence, particularly when Steve would drink. You had the incident where the co-worker saw Karen with strangulation marks on her neck, and Karen had told her it was Steve Strong that did it. So that was a significant component to the case. Put all the pieces of the puzzle together, and it did look like they've got a reasonable likelihood of conviction.
Steve is held on remand for 6 months as prosecutors prepare their case. But just before the trial is set to begin, Steve's defense attorney asked the judge to exclude the testimony from Karen's coworker about Steve strangling Karen.
The defense said the coworker didn't actually see it. The coworker is only reporting what Karen told her in what's known as double hearsay. And the judge made an evidentiary ruling that disallowed prosecutors from using that evidence or information at trial.
And that was kind of a shocker to me because that was one of our key pieces of evidence. Interviews where people had seen the bruises, she had told them who gave her the bruises. Unfortunately, all of that comes out to be hearsay evidence and was not going to be admissible to court.
Without an eyewitness to abuse, prosecutors have a hole in their case against Steve.
Without that information, they don't have enough evidence to persuade a jury beyond a reasonable doubt that he killed Karen. And if they go forward and lose, Steve Strong, because of double jeopardy, could never be prosecuted again for Karen's murder.
Prosecutors make the difficult decision to drop the charges and let Steve walk free.
When I found out the charges wouldn't hold, my heart just sank. It was like, what? Why is this happening? Show me why this is happening, because I can't wrap myself around this. I just didn't understand why they didn't have the evidence.
Coco was very upset that we had released him, and so was I, but most of the evidence that we had against him was circumstantial evidence. We didn't have any hard evidence towards Steve.
For the next 4 months, detectives continue digging, trying to find the evidence they need to close the case.
I did a lot of running around during that time, interviewing people and trying to find more evidence. However, most of the stuff we were getting was still hearsay.
By the time the 1-year anniversary of Karen's murder comes, little hope remains.
I felt that I had done everything that I could. My main thing at the time was making sure that I had preserved all the evidence we had collected, so if something did come up later, we would be able to use it.
In the summer of 1981, the hunt for Karen's killer goes cold.
A year went by, another year went by, and I'd call anything, do you have anything new? Nothing, Coco, nothing, and it's like, did he really get away with it?
The case remains cold for more than 2 decades, but police in Woods Cross never forget the murder of Karen Strong.
I retired in 2005. However, I have to admit that I was still upset about the fact that I could not tie Steve to the murder.
In 2006, 26 years after the crime, new detectives take a fresh look.
This case was a high-profile case, and at one time there had been a lull in the caseload, so I had asked if I could focus all my time on this case. And knowing that there was new developments in science, I figured that it was the right time to pick this up, because if this case could be solved, it could be solved now. I went through the evidence looking for specific items that could be tested. The items that we sent into the lab for examination first were Karen's fingernails.
Police in 1980 found material under Karen's fingernails, but had no way of testing it. Could this hold the key to identifying Karen's killer?
We was quite worried that the evidence had degraded. I mean, it had been 26 years.
The crime lab tests Karen's fingernails, searching for her attacker's DNA.
When those results came back, it was a bombshell. There was DNA of Steve Strom underneath Karen's fingernails, but also there was unexpected DNA evidence underneath Karen Strom's fingernails. And guess what? We have a new suspect.
Investigators who have reopened the cold case murder of Karen Strom have just received their first clue in more than 25 years. DNA from under Karen's fingernails has been traced to 2 different men, her husband, Steve Strom, and someone on the original investigator's radar.
That DNA belonged to Ed Owens. The fact that Ed Owens's DNA was underneath Karen Strom's fingernails, it was shocking.
Ed Owens was Steve's friend and co-worker. Ed's blood had been collected in 1980, when police first considered him a suspect.
There was no recent contact between the two that anyone was aware of. We got to dig a little bit deeper into Ed Owens as a realistic suspect.
The presence of Ed and Steve's DNA is evidence to investigators the men had contact with Karen. But is it a sign that one or both had killed her? In search of answers, detectives tracked down the now 56-year-old Owens.
Ed and his wife were currently living in Falls Church, Virginia. Initially, when I was talking with Ed, he started asking me questions as far as who the suspect was and any new developments in the case. I was suspicious when talking to Ed because of the questions that he was asking me. I wanted him to come into Woods Cross and meet with me and discuss this matter face to face.
Ed Owens agrees to come back to speak with investigators the following week. Detectives also reach out to the now 53-year-old Steve Strom.
Steve had moved to Henderson, Nevada. I contacted Steve and asked him if he would come up from Henderson and meet with me and go over his statement that he gave back in 1980. He wasn't at all that cooperative. He said that for years he's been telling the authorities that he didn't do it, and he believed that we was still after him.
For prosecutors, Steve's DNA under Karen's fingernails does not, in fact, strengthen the case against him.
It was not new to learn he was with Karen on the night that she had been murdered. We're now looking at this from what can the science show us? Who can we show did what based upon this evidence? So now we need to take the next level of testing and figure out what type of DNA are we talking about.
Detectives resubmit the fingernail DNA for a more detailed analysis. And the forensics lab has another surprise in store for investigators.
It was determined that Steve's sample was very minute and Ed's was the dominant sample. And the substance of Ed's was seminal fluid. I was a little shocked about that.
Steve and Ed were close friends, but there was no relationship between him and Karen.
Karen's autopsy had shown no evidence of sexual assault, so investigators are surprised by the indication of sexual activity.
That was unexpected. Why is Ed Owens' seminal fluid underneath Karen Strom's fingernails? What happened here? Was this consensual sex that then went awry? Was it not consensual sex? Was this a forced sexual assault situation?
In the 1980 investigation, Ed's alibi put him at a bar with friends when Karen was killed.
I contacted the co-workers, people that had been to the bar with Ed on the night of the homicide. Both of the witnesses was unable to say whether Ed was at the bar the whole time.
The co-workers had also noticed the scratches on Ed's hands and face the day after Karen's murder.
Ed was asked how he obtained those injuries, and he said that he was playing with his dog.
Strikingly, that statement contradicts the one Ed gave to detectives 26 years prior.
Ed had said that those scratches were obtained by working on a lathe machine. This was raising some red flags as far as Ed's involvement in this matter.
Detectives are eager to talk to Ed themselves, but he fails to arrive for his scheduled interview.
Ed just mysteriously turned up missing 2 days after he had spoken with me. Left a note for his wife. It was a goodbye note. Well, after hearing this, I subpoenaed some banking records of Ed's, and through those records, we determined that he crossed the border into Mexico. An innocent person just wouldn't up and leave his family and flee.
Detectives get another surprise when they dig deeper into Ed's background.
Back in 1980, the investigators ran a background check on Ed Owens in Utah. I, however, ran the national database on Ed Owens and found that Ed had been arrested in California in 1973 and charged with attempted murder.
A man raped a girl on the beach, strangled her, and then he stabbed her with a screwdriver and left her for dead. Ed Owens is charged and arrested, did go to trial, but Ed Owens' mother gave him an alibi. So the jury did not convict Ed Owens. Even though Ed hadn't been convicted, pieces of the puzzle just start to fall into place. We believe Ed's the killer.
An arrest warrant is issued for Ed Owens for the murder of Karen Strom.
When Sergeant Benson called me and said, "Coco, are you sitting down?" He goes, "Do you know who Ed Owens is?" I said, "I've never heard of him." And he said, "Coco, that's who killed your sister." I was shocked. All these years thinking of Steve, I was stunned. I was like, really? It was like starting all over again from scratch. Who's Ed Owens and how did he know my sister?
It was kind of a shocker to me because I was totally convinced that it was Steve.
With Ed Owens in Mexico, investigators strategize how to get him back to face justice.
I made contact with Ed's mother, advised her that I had a warrant of arrest for him and that he could either come in voluntarily to meet with me or his picture would be on the 5 o'clock news.
And then, interestingly enough, Ed Owens then shows up. He came back to Utah, came walking in the door.
I was surprised that Ed actually showed up to the office. I believe that he was trying to put on this persona for his family of what type of a person he was. At that time, I took him to an interview room and attempted to get a statement from Ed. However, he lawyered up and didn't want to make a statement.
On March 14th, 2007, after 2.5 decades, Ed Owens is arrested and charged with the murder of Karen Strom.
Our case is looking pretty good to us at this point in time. We've got science now backing us up. We've decimated his alibi. We've got the evidence of flight. So a lot of things were stacking up in favor of a conviction.
But then, 3 weeks before the trial, prosecutors are thrown another curveball when they learn of Ed's defense.
The defense's contention was going to be that Karen was having an affair with Ed. Steve became jealous and enraged about it. Steve went home and killed her.
The defense attorney was claiming that seminal fluid of Ed's only shows that he had had an affair with Karen, not that he'd actually killed her.
It's a jolt. We were kind of blown away. Ed had never, ever come forward with that story before. This was something new, so it opened up a new can of worms.
Prosecutors know this defense could be enough to raise reasonable doubt to a jury, especially since Steve had originally been charged with Karen's murder. But how could they disprove the defense's claims?
Is there a smoking gun with this case? We got to find it. We now need to regroup. So again, like they did back in 1980, we dismissed the case without prejudice as we're getting close to trial. That was not an easy decision to make, but we knew it was the right thing to do. We were confident we had the right guy, but at that point in time, we weren't confident we had a case where we were going to be able to secure a conviction. So Ed Owens walked away a free man. That was a tough pill to swallow because we knew he wasn't innocent. Can we prove it?
When the case got dismissed, it was very frustrating. When Ed walked out, I was ticked off, to say the least. However, this wasn't the end for us. We were even more determined that we were going to bring him to justice.
"26 years after the murder of Karen Strom, police have arrested their second suspect in the crime, Ed Owens. But prosecutors are forced to drop charges against Ed, leaving Karen's family desperate for justice.
After they released Ed Owens, I told Troy, please don't give up, you guys. Come on, there's got to be something. Please don't give up.
I made a promise to Coco Saltzgiver. We're not giving up on the case. We're not abandoning it. Dismissal without prejudice means it can be refiled. We knew Ed Owens did it. We just wanted to get to the point where we knew we could actually prove it.
Detectives re-interview those who knew Karen to find out if she really could have been having an affair with Ed Owens before she was killed.
And all the witnesses that I talked to, it was pretty obvious that Steve, being as jealous as he was, and also Karen's relationship with Buff, Karen would not be having an affair with Ed Owens.
With no evidence of sexual assault found during Karen's autopsy, prosecutors need to establish an alternate theory to Ed's claim of an affair.
So why is Ed Owens' seminal fluid underneath Karen Strom's fingernails? The best theory that we had is Ed Owens went into Karen Strom and Steve Strom's home that night in the summer of 1980 with intent to sexually assault her. That Karen successfully stopped him. I believe that that's probably the best answer because there was no genital injury to our victim, Karen Strom. Yet there's a hell of a struggle. And the way he crushed her neck, it's in anger. He didn't get what he wanted.
Prosecutors know they only have one shot at making Ed pay for his crime, and they'll need hard evidence to convince a jury.
We can't let him get away with it now again for what he did in 1980. We had to continue to focus in on that crime scene. Focus in on Karen's body, go through all the evidence again, looking at every crime scene photo that we had, blowing things up. It's there. We're not going to give up until we find it.
Investigators spend weeks examining the evidence in minute detail. Then, they catch something on the underwear Karen was wearing the night she was killed.
One of the things that we did notice was there were some very tiny droplets that had never been analyzed. They'd kind of been overlooked.
We submitted those to the crime lab. We did not know exactly what it was.
When those results came back, another one of these aha moments, that material that was on Karen Strom's panties was Ed Owens' blood. And now, we've got this. This was not a consensual sexual encounter.
It's the final piece prosecutors are looking for. Ed Owens is picked up and recharged with Karen's murder.
When Ed Owens was rearrested, it was a great feeling. Now we felt like our case was ready for prime time.
At trial, in front of Karen's family, prosecutors present how the crime unfolded.
Ed had gone to the bar, and knowing that Steve was coming into work, slipped out of the bar, and then went to the Strom residence to sexually assault Karen. Struggle ensued. She started lashing out at him. He ended up grabbing her by the throat, killed her, then went back to the bar with his co-workers, using them as an alibi.
Sitting through that trial and watching the evidence they had, it was horrific what he did to her. Oh my God, she must have been terrified. But she fought. Oh, she fought hard.
Who is the best witness against Ed Owens? It's Karen Strom. By the fight she put up and the evidence she gathered, part of what she got out of him when she gouged him was his blood.
The defense argues that Ed is innocent and that Steve killed Karen out of jealousy.
Ed seemed like he was very cocky and that he was confident that he was going to beat this case.
The judge let me address him at the trial. I said, "You took my sister from me. You took my best friend. You took the person I feel safe with in the world. You took that from me." And he's smiling at me. He was smiling the whole time.
After a 7-day trial, the jury takes just 9 hours to come to a decision. On April 1st, 2009, the jury returns their verdict.
When they said guilty, I just, yes! You know, and then I said, Karen, we did it! Sissy, we did it! We got him!
There were a lot of people that waited many, many years for justice with this case. When the jury said guilty, it's a sense of relief, a sense of accomplishment, a sense of justice for the victim.
Almost 30 years after Karen Strom was killed, Ed Owens is sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole.
His first parole hearing will be in 2032. Ed at that time will be in his upper 80s. Ed will essentially be spending the rest of his life in jail.
For Karen's loved ones, Ed may have taken her life, but he can never take Karen from their hearts.
I think of Karen all the time. I have a picture of her on my bookshelf, and I know her energy is still there. I can feel it. She was just so kind and so caring. She was a beautiful person, a beautiful soul. You can never be the same again when somebody's ripped out of your life like that. And you have that hole, but you can heal from something like this. It is possible. But you fill that hole with life. And you hope you live a good life for her too, because she didn't get to.
A vibrant young woman with a bright future.
She just was like a magnet. She was very, very pretty, but also very smart.
Is the victim of a truly disturbing murder.
He'd been struck on the head many times.
It's kind of the horror story.
The body itself appeared to have been washed. Jewelry had been put on her after the fact.
She had been staged for this suspect's desires. Who could have done this? Could it be somebody who likes her, somebody who has a fantasy over her?
Detectives hunt for a deranged killer.
We noticed bloodied palm print.
Police had collected about 100 different print impressions.
We could be looking for a serial killer.
Just when it looks like justice may never be served.
It was extremely frustrating.
A stunning discovery points to a murderer in their midst.
When we found out who it was like, are you kidding? Nobody could believe it.
Less than an hour outside Los Angeles, Irvine, California is a peaceful community with a coastal vibe.
Irvine is very, very pretty. It is pretty much the hub of Orange County. The ocean's only 10 minutes away, and this is where everybody wanted to be.
Irvine has always been considered to be a very safe city and has not been known for violence.
On May 14th, 1979, Irvine's sense of safety is shattered when a man calls 911 to say he can't get a hold of his 22-year-old girlfriend, Savannah Anderson.
Earlier that day, her boyfriend went over to her residence to meet her at about 6 o'clock. He couldn't get any response at the door.
He went back home for a while, couldn't get a hold of her still.
He called the police department about 7:25 p.m. It was a welfare check. Her boyfriend indicated that she had not been feeling well, and so there was a concern that it could be a health issue. When the officer arrived, he met her boyfriend, Bill Mills, and another man, Ken Bergenson, who identified himself as her boss.
They explained they'd both come to the apartment to try to find out if she was okay because nobody'd been able to get a hold of her that day.
I was very fortunate to work with Savannah. Savannah was always prompt, and she didn't come that day. All day long, it was like trying to get a hold of her, no answers. By the end of the day, we were very concerned something might have happened because that wasn't like her.
The officer found the apartment was in fact locked up tight. There was no key available from the apartment office. The officer found out that a bedroom window nearby was unlocked from the inside. He was able to open that bedroom window.
When the officer made entry, he was able to see a woman with a lot of blood around her, lying in bed, towels wrapped around her face and head. She was cold to the touch.
Both Savannah's boyfriend and boss are taken to the station for questioning, while homicide investigators are called to the scene.
When I walked in, it appeared to me that there was a struggle, a fight, and it was very clear that she was attacked on the bed, and she laid on the bed for some time due to the amount of blood that had pooled in that area. A lot of blood splattering against the back of the wall and the headboard.
She also had towels over her face. After the towels were taken off, her face was found out to be beaten very severely, excessively.
The towels were significant. It tells you that the killer may have known her and didn't want to look at what they've done.
It appeared that the body of the victim had been beaten with something hard.
She had multiple defensive marks on her arms, her hands, nail marks around the neck area, which would indicate that she also had a ligature that had been placed around her neck.
The legs were slightly raised as if some sexual activity may have occurred there.
Perhaps she was the victim of a sexual assault.
The degree of violence to Savannah's body was unusual. Did somebody do it because they were angry at her? If they were angry at her, is that because they knew her, they loved her, they hated her?
Based on the state of the body, police believe Savannah was likely killed in the early hours of the morning. Looking closer, several details strike investigators as highly unusual.
Savannah had some jewelry on her. There was a necklace around her neck, and the clasp was at the front. There's also a watch on her arm that looked like it had just been put on there loosely.
We were surprised to see that those items were still intact on her based upon the brutality of her attacker. So it appeared that he may have just put those items back on her.
The body itself appeared to have been washed, as there's very little blood on the skin surface of the victim.
We noticed drag marks from the bed onto the carpet leading into the bathroom. Inside the bathroom, there was diluted blood with water around the sink area and also the bathtub.
She looked like she had been cleaned up and set in a particular position on the bed. It was staged for this suspect's desires. And I think that was important to get an idea of what this type of person was willing to do to Savannah's body, put things on her, put clothes on her, whatever.
It was very unusual for any type of murder, in my opinion. It looks like somebody wanted to make it look like she was fine and nothing was wrong.
Police find some important clues the killer left behind.
We noticed bloodied palm print leading from the bedroom into the bathroom. Palm prints are identifiable just like fingerprints. There were smudged, bloodied fingerprints on the toilet seat.
They were basically the only way that we'd be able to find out who the killer might have been. There was no DNA at the time.
Detectives find no murder weapon or any sign of forced entry.
We made the determination that the killer may have been known by Savannah and let him in through the front door. Another theory was through an unlocked open window.
After finishing up at the scene, detectives break the news of Savannah's death to her loved ones.
The parents lived in Utah. When I spoke to Savannah's mother on the phone, she was devastated by this. It was her only child. It's probably hard for most people to realize, first of all, what it's like to lose a child, let alone the only child you have. Savannah's mother said Savannah had made a collect call to her about 10 o'clock the previous day on Mother's Day evening. They had talked on the phone for about 2 hours. Savannah was very happy, good mood. That must have made it even more so difficult.
When I found out what had happened to Savannah, we were all totally shocked. My heart just hurt so much. How very sad this beautiful young lady, her life was gone is very senseless, very, very hard to understand.
Born in 1956, Savannah Anderson grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah, and had big dreams.
She was 22 when she moved to Irvine. She came here looking for a better opportunity. She was very independent, and she wanted to do it on her own. I met Savannah when she was working here for Commercial Credit. Savannah was a secretary for the operations manager. She just was like a magnet. She was very, very pretty. I remember when people did come in the office, especially the men, she did attract attention.
Savannah was flattered, but she did have a boyfriend, Bill Mills, whom she met 3 months after moving to California.
She was more of a private person into herself as far as not one to just open up and tell everybody what she was doing. She was definitely on the shy side. When I found out what had happened to Savannah, I felt angry and just crushed and so hurt. My first thought was just how tragic this was. I just can't imagine.
It's kind of the horror story. Who could have done this? Could it be somebody close to her, somebody who knows her, somebody who likes her, somebody who has a fantasy over her? When you have a brutal killing like Savannah's case, detectives immediately looked for the people that are close to her, her boyfriend.
The fact that Bill, the boyfriend, was the one that called the police, is he innocently calling the police here because he doesn't know that something had happened to her? Or is he the one who may have done it, so he contacted the police to say, gee, something might be wrong, with the hopes that the police will go ahead and discover the crime and then say, well, it can't be the boyfriend because he called us here. Could it be almost a way out to try to point the finger away from you? It's just something you have to look into.
Coming up, police question the grieving boyfriend to see if he has something to hide.
His attorney advised him not to take a polygraph.
And detectives uncover more suspects.
Why is he here now at this time? That was suspicious.
Somebody was lying.
Another crime turns the investigation on its head.
This individual was responsible for 5 murders. Perhaps she was the victim of this killer.
And the perpetrator's identity leaves everyone in shock.
It was absolutely devastating when we found out who it was.
Police investigating the gruesome murder of 22-year-old Savannah Anderson have their first suspect, her boyfriend, Bill Mills.
When you have a crime of passion where somebody is murdered, there are definitely times when a boyfriend who just got angry and upset did the crime.
The first thing we did was began meeting with Bill Mills so we could understand better about Savannah, his relationship.
Bill tells police he and Savannah started dating 6 months ago, and he was in love.
They had met each other in another apartment community. They had gotten along well.
He was about 9 years older than Savannah. In talking with him, had learned that he had just asked her to marry him.
Police are curious if something came up to disrupt the couple's plans for the future.
It was a large, violent crime scene. Did he do it because he was angry at her?
Bill tells investigators he last saw Savannah a day earlier on May 13th.
They had brunch together, and then he spent the day over at her apartment. During the interview with Bill Mills, we found out that Savannah and he did have sex that day. So that would be important later on in case there was semen found inside of her.
Bill told me on the 13th he left her apartment at about 10 p.m.
Once he did leave, what happened to him? Could anybody account for his activity after he apparently left her apartment?
He said he went home, he went to bed, and then to work the following day.
Bill says he and Savannah had plans on the 14th after they both got off work.
He went to her apartment about 6, knocked, couldn't raise her. He went back home for a while, then Bill Mills went ahead and contacted the police department.
Bill denies having anything to do with Savannah's death.
It appeared that Bill Mills was really in love with her, thought it was a very serious relationship. He was very happy with her.
Bill was cooperative. He tried to assist us as much as he could.
But there is one request Bill won't comply with.
There is a red flag. He was asked if he would be willing to take a polygraph. He contacted an attorney, and his attorney advised him not to take one.
We did ask if we could see his body, his hands, his arms, see if there's any indications of a struggle with anybody. But his body was clean. We asked him if we could go ahead and take his finger and palm prints. He agreed to let us do that.
It will be weeks before the results come in. In the meantime, detectives are forced to let Bill go. Next, they move on to another man in Savannah's life.
Part of the investigation and process was to meet with her boss, Ken Bergeson, who had been at the crime scene. In speaking with him, he said he had known her in Salt Lake and had offered her a job locally here.
Ken Bergeson also said that he kind of considered himself a father figure to her. He helped her move. They had talked many times, been out for drinks, been out for lunch and different things.
Could Ken have wanted more than a professional relationship with Savannah?
Was anything going on romantically in the present day?
I asked Ken where he was the night of May 13th, and he indicated that he was with his wife that whole evening.
We did contact the wife to verify that, and there's no reason to believe that he was anywhere but at his home that night.
After the interview, we asked Ken to submit his prints so they could be compared against the crime scene.
We just let him go home that night after the interview.
The police questioned each one of us in the office. I worked for Ken Bergeson at the time. He was just such a nice guy and so concerned about her. She was living by herself, and she was just so beautiful. I just thought, somebody saw her. Somebody was either stalking her or something happened. But I was just so angry that somebody could possibly do something like this. It had to have been somebody I thought who was very sick.
There was nothing really that drew anyone's attention to any issues that Savannah had at work, and nothing came of it.
Police canvassed the apartment complex the next day, searching for witnesses.
We didn't find anyone that said that they'd heard any struggle or screams to corroborate when that attack may have occurred. There were 2 security guards that were assigned to the complex. It was a multi-unit under construction.
So after I got the names of the security personnel who worked that night, which was about a week after we originally responded out there, I talked to the security guard first who worked the midnight to 6:30 shift. His name was Chuck Doyle.
According to Doyle, security was hired to ensure the residents were safe and to overlook any construction sites and that sort of thing for theft.
Chuck tells investigators on a usual shift he would drive through the complex and also patrol by foot.
I asked him how he found out about the murder of the woman, and he said he found out through the company. I asked him if he knew the lady who lived there, showed him 2 pictures, and he picked out the picture of Savannah Anderson.
When asked about his dealings with Savannah, Chuck's answer gives investigators cause for concern.
He indicated about a month prior that he'd helped Savannah gain entry into her apartment and slid a window open for her.
It was notable that Mr. Doyle had said he was aware that at least at that time one of the windows was unlocked.
Doyle said, "You'll find my fingerprints on Savannah's window, and this is the reason why." Immediately, we printed him. It really made me zero in on him as a potential suspect.
A week after Savannah Anderson was found bludgeoned to death in her bed, security guard Chuck Doyle has drawn suspicion after admitting that his fingerprints are likely on her unlocked window.
She had locked herself out of her apartment before, contacted him while he was on the site to see if he could help her get into the apartment. The security did not have any pass keys. He found that a window was unlocked. He was able to slide the window open. He also said that he didn't go inside. Now, that could be for a couple of reasons. Could be perfectly innocent that he didn't go inside. Could also be to say, well, I didn't go inside if he may have somehow be involved in the death.
Had Chuck slipped in through the same unlocked window to kill Savannah? Police press him for his movements that night.
Chuck Doyle said that he reported for duty on the 14th at midnight, or was supposed to, indicated that he was about 10 minutes, 15 minutes late.
He was supposed to replace a security guard named Bob Sellers.
He drove by Savannah's and saw her talking on the phone. He thought maybe that was around 12:15 or so, 12:20, but was not certain.
He went and parked next to Bob Sellers' car. About 12:30, he estimated, Sellers approached. He got daily reports from Sellers, and then Sellers went ahead and got in his car and drove off.
When detectives ask what happened next, Chuck's answer raises even more suspicion.
He said he drove around a while, went back to the carport, and went to sleep, which would seem very odd.
He thought he probably nodded off for a while.
Doyle says that he was awoken by a car door slam. It was Sellers who had returned and invited him to breakfast. Doyle says it was maybe 1 or 2 in the morning. They went to breakfast at Spire's restaurant, a 24-hour cafe.
The cafe is just 10 minutes from the complex.
Doyle said that he was dropped off by Sellers at about 2:30 in the morning.
Chuck says the rest of his shift was uneventful, and he clocked out at 6:30 a.m.
There's just something really unusual about the sequence of events that's being described by Doyle.
Investigators are left with more questions than answers. Did Savannah die on Chuck's watch? Or was he the one who killed her? Hoping for clarity and to corroborate Chuck's story, they turn to the other security guard, Robert Sellers.
Robert Sellers enlisted into the Marine Corps at age 17. He's 22 now.
He was assigned that day to work from about 4 in the afternoon, and he was supposed to get off at about midnight that night. I asked him if he knew who Savannah Anderson was. He said he had talked to both her and her boyfriend that evening.
Sellers told me that he thought he saw Savannah around 10 p.m. on the phone.
Robert confirms that Chuck was late for work, so he didn't leave the apartment complex until around 12:30 a.m.
After leaving Doyle, he then went home, showered.
As a U.S. Marine, he was supposed to go to a Marine base. At 6 o'clock in the morning,
he decided it wasn't worth trying to go to sleep, so he thought, well, I'll just go out to breakfast with Doyle. So that's when he returned.
Sellers told me that he came back to the complex about 3:30, which is an hour and a half or 2 hours after what Doyle recalled this happening. So there was this inconsistency between the both of them about what time they must have gone to the restaurant. Sellers said there's a waitress named Gail who waited on him. I took note of that. At the end of the Sellers interview, we asked if he would go ahead and give us finger palm prints, which he agreed to.
Investigators hope the autopsy report can help them pinpoint Savannah's time of death.
According to the coroner's report, Savannah Anderson died at approximately 2 a.m. on May 14th. The cause of death was strangulation.
She'd been struck on the head many times, found multiple contusions on her face. There was broken fingernails, a broken jaw, cracked teeth.
We did have biological fluids, semen that was found, but DNA was not in existence at the time, so we didn't have that tool.
My first thought was just how horrible to die like that. I cried and I was just very upset, just thinking that something like that had happened to a person that was just so lovely. It's just terrible.
If Savannah was killed at 2 a.m., which security guard is telling the truth? Was Chuck really off site like he claimed? Or was Robert right, meaning Chuck was at the apartment complex when the murder took place?
There was a wide gap and discrepancy between their two stories and timing. So the two were brought in together to try and determine if someone was mistaken about times.
They both basically stuck to their stories. I wasn't sure which either timeline might have been correct, whether it might have been Doyle's or Sellers, because they were just too far apart. So we thought at that time somebody was lying.
Detectives are investigating the disturbing murder of Savannah Anderson. The two security guards from her apartment complex are unable to agree where they were at 2 a.m. when Savannah was killed.
The timing is very sketchy between what Doyle says and what we learned from Sellers.
This is raising a lot of flags to me, because why don't they know where they were and what time they were?
Going over time discrepancies, Doyle said, well, I slept, I could be mistaken, I'm not sure. So Sellers seemed to be more credible time-wise.
According to Robert Sellers, Chuck was on duty at 2 a.m. and the pair only went to Spire's restaurant around 3:30 a.m.
I asked one of the patrol guys to go ahead and try to contact any waitress there that might have been named Gail to see if she recalled the security guys coming in there at all. They weren't able to find a Gail that worked at the Spire's restaurant, so we could not identify that particular part of the story. It looked like the best chance of us determining who the suspect was going to be through the fingerprint and palm print evidence left behind. At this time, we already had fingerprints and palm prints from the boyfriend, Bill Mills, the boss, Ken Bergerson, and from the two security guards, Chuck Doyle and Bob Sellers. And I felt that if we can find out if any of those were the palm prints, that's going to be the resolution of our case. We'd be able to determine who had done it. So we sent them away with high hopes that we're going to be able to resolve the case once we get the results back.
While waiting for the results, investigators dig deeper into Savannah's life, hoping something will point to her killer.
Savannah seemed to be a very likable person who had, from all reports, a good mind, good IQ, personable, funny, one that you would be very happy to have as a daughter.
She was very sweet, very sophisticated, quiet. She had very strong values and morals. You know, she was just not one of those that was going to be out looking for trouble. Just how she went and how young she went is so tragic. Our world is, it's cruel.
We interviewed neighbors. Savannah had been at the apartment complex about 6 weeks. Her contacts, friends were very limited. What I learned through investigation was Savannah had moved deliberately for the safety of having security on the premises.
She really wanted a place that felt safe, and the fact that they had security, she loved that aspect of it. She felt really good about where she was going.
2 months after Savannah's death, police received the results of the finger and palm print analysis from the scene.
I was really hoping we heard back from the crime lab that it's going to be one of the guys we'd already talked to.
In terms of identification and finding and identifying that individual, it was everything.
None of the prints that came back were any of the fingerprints submitted from the bloody finger and palm prints. Really disappointing. Couldn't figure out why. It seemed like there should have been somebody in there that was responsible for it, yet the crime lab is telling us that these weren't the responsible parties at all. We thought we had some viable suspect, but we're told, nope, it's not them. Well, now what? Wow.
The results mean Savannah's boyfriend, her boss, and the two security guards are all cleared.
I was very discouraged, but thought, okay, we just haven't come across the perpetrator. He's out there. We'll find him. We'll identify him. I feel comfortable with that based on the palm print.
Detectives immediately looked for people in the area that maybe had criminal histories. They looked at people that had been arrested after that for similar type of break-in crimes. And if they had any suspicions whatsoever, they would get their palm print and their fingerprints, and they'd compare them to the crime scene prints and then rule them out if they didn't match.
3 months after the crime, police had collected about 100 different print impressions.
The palm prints didn't match. It was extremely frustrating to work through this.
With the case threatening to turn cold, detectives refused to quit and take the case in a chilling new direction.
After going through potential suspects that were eliminated through the palm print, we began to examine that Savannah Anderson may be the victim of a serial killer known as the Bedroom Basher. This individual was responsible for 5 murders in the Orange County area at the time.
With a population under 2 million people, the number of attacks in a matter of months is troubling, and the similarities striking.
He would target young lone females between 17 and 35, ground floor apartments, open windows, open doors. Once inside, he would bludgeon, strangle, and sexually assault the females. So Savannah certainly fit that MO. And so we had to take a real strong look at perhaps she was the victim of this individual who had not been identified. We could be looking for a serial killer.
Detectives investigating the brutal murder of Savannah Anderson now believe she may have fallen victim to a serial killer.
Bedroom Basher went after females in homes or apartments in the Orange County area, raped them, in at least one case, killed somebody by bludgeoning them, which is what happened to Savannah.
Based upon the number of bludgeonings in Orange County, which were 5, we felt that there would be another that would take place.
5 months after Savannah's murder, investigators' worst fears are confirmed when the serial killer strikes again.
During this time, there was a woman in Orange County that had been attacked, believed by the Bedroom Basher, who survived and was able to give a description to the police. A composite drawing was made. She described the perpetrator as a male, olive skin, pockmarked face, long hair, mustache, dark eyes, in his late 20s, early 30s. A task force was created in Orange County. Flyers were disseminated to the public and to patrol units. It resulted in multiple contacts of people who believed they knew who this individual was. Unfortunately, none of those resulted in the apprehension of the individual.
A year after the murder, with no arrests and a killer on the loose, women in the area live in a constant state of terror.
The community was definitely impacted by this terrible murder. The news was full of these kind of things, and it did create fear among people. The fact that I was living so close by, it's a little scary.
Any female who resided by themselves took extra precautions to ensure that their windows, doors were in fact locked. Every possibility we looked at, we were unable to make any headway in determining what happened to Savannah Anderson. It was extremely frustrating. There was no one else that we were aware of that could provide any insight and/or potentially could be a suspect.
3 years after Savannah's murder, her case remains unsolved.
After you go through tips, leads, you step back, you re-examine, you say, what did I miss? It's got to be there. What did I miss?
I've started to believe that they just weren't going to find out. And that's terrible to think that something like that could happen and that this person is out there roaming around still.
2 more years pass until a rookie homicide detective takes a renewed interest in the case.
Savannah's case was the first cold case that I ever worked. I was familiar with it because I was in patrol when it happened, and I thought, well, nobody's looked at it for a while. Maybe I should look at it.
A friend of mine who knows Larry Montgomery very well calls him the evidence whisperer.
I was aware he was looking at the Savannah Anderson case, and at one point he came to me and we compared notes on it.
After combing through all the evidence, detectives revisit whether Savannah was a victim of the still unidentified bedroom basher.
The possibility that she was killed by a serial killer was definitely looked at. I was looking at anything that I could use to direct me to a possible suspect. I'm looking at what was done at the crime scene, what did the suspect do with the body, what was maybe in his mind because of what he did.
In comparing Savannah's murder to those committed by the bedroom basher, something just doesn't add up.
The one thing that stood out that was not similar was the cleaning up of the victim.
When I look at a crime scene like this, it's somebody who has a desire for Savannah. She appeared uninjured other than towels on top of her face. It wasn't the gore that he liked. He had to kill her in order to get her into a position where he could fantasize about having an actual relationship with her. This is a real girl now, as opposed to a dead body. The question in this case is, who did it? All the people we've looked at and that looked good were not matching the prints. There was one point where I started looking at the security guards to see what they were doing, because they were certainly involved in being there at the time. There were very big differences between what Doyle said happened and what Sellers said happened that night. And I thought that was very odd.
I thought at the time that I interviewed Doyle that one of the problems was he may have gone to sleep for a while. That would certainly account for the timeline being different, or his uneasiness in talking to us about that particular time period.
Police quickly locate Chuck and bring him in for another interview. His story about what happened the night of the murder is the same, but a few details stand out.
Doyle said that he got to the site probably 10 minutes late. He had not been able to find the person he was supposed to replace yet, Bob Sellers. About 12:30, Doyle saw Sellers come with a shirt in his hand, and I asked Doyle, did you ever ask him why he was late or why he didn't have his uniform shirt on? He said, no, he never asked him that. He just figures he's on his own time, so he could probably wear whatever he wants.
That's unusual. That right there's a big red flag.
That's not the only thing that raises alarm bells.
Doyle said that Sellers had commented about wanting to have a drink with Savannah. He thought she was very attractive.
Detectives asked Chuck Doyle if Robert Sellers ever confided anything else to him.
Regarding the relationship between Doyle and Sellers, they weren't buddies. They didn't do things together. They weren't really close friends.
Following this lead, investigators asked Chuck if it was common for them to go for breakfast during a shift, like they did the night of the murder.
They never did that before. So why is Sellers there on a night when he's supposed to leave soon to go to work at a Marine base, saying, hey, you want to go get something to eat? It didn't seem to fit. But I had the paperwork that shows that he had been exonerated. It wasn't his print. But I saw all kinds of things that Sellers did that was suspicious. Why is he here now at this time? It all fits if he came back and did something with the body at that time. It all made sense time-wise. And that's when I decided we need to find those prints again and see if we matched them properly.
Five years after Savannah Anderson was found murdered in her apartment, cold case investigators suspect her killer has been hiding in plain sight the entire time.
I've got a suspicion that this guy, Robert Sellers, might be the guy, because there's too many lies or mistakes. He's already been exonerated, and I didn't believe the exoneration. We need to find somebody who's better than our sheriff's department, who's best in the world that we can get.
Robert's prints and the ones found at the crime scene are rushed to FBI headquarters.
The FBI discovered that some parts of the palm print were so thick with blood that it became a negative. It was the opposite of what it should be because of the thick blood. The thick blood looked like the ridges when really they were the valleys of the print.
The FBI reanalyzed the palm print and compare it to prints obtained from Robert.
The next day, the fingerprint lab at the FBI was able to identify in about 24 points of identification, a positive identification of security guard Bob Sellers.
We have to arrest him now. Sellers, at the time that he was arrested, was living in a mobile home up in Brea at the police department. He was presented with evidence that his prints are, in fact, in the blood there. He didn't come forward right away, but very quickly, after he had some lies, he did admit that he did everything that we thought he did.
He was obsessed with her. He found her very attractive. He thought perhaps by going into her apartment that he might convince her of some romantic get-together. He gained entry into her apartment through an unlocked window where he could hear her on the telephone talking with her mother. He stayed in the bedroom, hid as best possible while she talked in the kitchen living room area. Once she got off the phone at about a little after 12, she came into the bedroom. When she saw him, she was thinking, I have an intruder, a man in here, and I'm frightened. And he became frightened and realized that he had to silence her. He pulled out his baton and began striking her. He then went to strangulation.
During the struggle with Savannah, he said that his shirt got bloody, so he had to take it off. So when he went to see Doyle, he had his shirt in his hand so that his replacement would not see the blood on it.
And then he goes home, gets cleaned up, sneaks back in, and then goes into Savannah's apartment. Sellers wanted her sexually. He had to kill her to get that. He did talk about he wanted her to be clean, and so that's why he drug her into the shower and washed the blood off of her and took her back into the bedroom and wrapped her head in towels because she was so badly beaten. So then he just had a body that was clean and he could have his fantasy. At 3 o'clock in the morning, he's trying to sneak out, and that's when Doyle sees him, and that's when, at the spur of the moment, he has to all of a sudden pretend like, oh, I'm here to go to breakfast with you, okay? He almost seemed relieved when he finally was able to confess that he actually did kill Savannah.
On March 29th, 1984, Robert Sellers is charged with murder, rape, attempted rape, and burglary.
I think after 5 years, he thought he probably did get away with it. In that time, he got married, started a family. The anguish that he caused with Savannah Anderson's death, he didn't deserve having that extra 5 years.
On November 4th, 1986, Robert Sellers is found guilty of first-degree murder and a special circumstance of rape. But his lawyers win his appeal.
His conviction was overturned on a technicality. The fact that the prosecution could not prove that she was alive during the rape changed the verdict for a life without possibility of parole.
Instead of a retrial, prosecutors offer Robert a deal. He accepts to avoid the death penalty and pleads guilty to first-degree murder. He is sentenced to 25 years to life in prison.
Here you have a guard, a man, a Marine, placed there to protect the residents, and it turned out he is the one committing the crime. One would not expect the one who is protecting you to be your killer.
It was absolutely devastating when we found out who it was. The irony of it all was the fact that she moved to this beautiful apartment complex thinking she was going to be safe and secure. And it was the security guard that actually did it. It was like, are you kidding? Nobody could believe it.
Authorities don't find anything to link Robert Sellers to the bedroom basher killings. In 1996, Gerald Parker was identified and convicted of those crimes. In 1999, Robert Sellers died in prison.
I do feel there was justice, especially when I found out that he died after he had been in prison. That was justice right there. When I remember Savannah, I think of this beautiful young woman, just the prettiest smile. She was very, very poised. I think she would have definitely had a bright future had her life not been taken in any sense of the matter, whether she had married and had a family or gone on in the business world. She just was a very lovely person.